Police have launched a murder inquiry after an elderly woman was found dead at her home in Fleckney.
I was gobsmacked. There's something could happen like this, literally on my doorstep.
This case was one of a kind. Not only the nature of it, but the brutal nature of it.
When I found out, it just floored me. How? Why could that happen?
This is an old lady who's been murdered and seriously sexually assaulted in her home.
How could somebody that I'd grown up with be capable of doing something like that?
A lot of people were generally scared.
This just doesn't look right.
There was no sign of forced entry, so it was obvious that it was somebody that she knew.
Hey! Open the door!
Right, at this moment in time, I'm arresting on suspicion of murder.
7 miles south of Leicester, in the heart of the English countryside, lies the quaint village of Fleckney.
Fleckney is a quiet village. It's very close-knit. It's like it has its own little bubble. People are very, very close. Everybody knows everybody. Most people are related in Fleckney.
Beautiful rural settings, friendly people, local community is fantastic. But yeah, it's a lovely, lovely place to live and grow up in.
It's not the sort of place where a lot of crime happens. I've been to Fleckney a few times. That had nothing to do with crime. I'd been there to judge a talent contest. I think it was called Fleckney's Got Talent.
The people who live in Fleckney are generally well-to-do. It's quite a low-crime area. There are retiring people there. There's some retirement bungalows around there. There's not a lot of throughfare. The people who are in Fleckney are generally the people who live there rather than the people who visit there.
And it was this perfect, idyllic village that 72-year-old Jane Hings chose to retire to.
Jane was an only child, and her mum and dad sadly passed away years before, which left her on her own with no immediate family around. Jane was quite a private person. She didn't like everyone to know, her business, and kept herself to herself, really. But once you got to know her, she opened up more, and it was just fun. She had quirky ways about her, but she was kind and she was caring.
Everybody in Fleckney knew Jane. She relied on people to give her a lift to the hairdressers, to the shops, things like that. She was inoffensive in every way. People didn't have bad things to say about her. And in her life beforehand, she worked hard.
Jane took pride in her appearance. She'd always, regular having her hair done every few weeks, and she'd always sort of make sure she was nicely dressed and put on a bit of makeup, so she'd still try and make the effort to look nice.
Having worked overseas as a nanny, Jane had settled into retirement, whilst also taking care of her much-loved rescue dog, Paddy.
He was spoilt rotten. Everything she did was for Paddy. You'd go in, there'd be dog treats stacked up to the ceiling. We'd lie on a bed at night and cuddle up with her.
Whilst Jane used friends and neighbours to help walk Paddy, in the summer of 2017, an accident meant she needed a lot more care.
Goodbye. Jane had a fall and was admitted to hospital for about 3 or 4 weeks.
She'd suffered some injuries when her dog Paddy had pulled her over, and then when she came out of hospital, that's when she needed the carers and she needed help in getting around, and she couldn't go very far.
But the community came together for Jane, and she slowly got back on her feet.
She was the sort of person that people warmed to, they liked her, and they were happy to help out.
Then, just a few weeks after leaving hospital, tragedy strikes.
On the Sunday morning, Jane's carers went in as they were meant to, about 7 o'clock in the morning. Jane's front door was unlocked, which is normal. They went in. She was laid in bed. The cover was pulled up over her head and both of her arms were raised above her head. When they peeled back the duvet, which had covered her head entirely, they saw that she had died.
The carers are puzzled that Jane's body is covered completely by the duvet and call for an ambulance. Then, they notice something else unusual. Items are out of place in Jane's usually meticulous house.
And when the ambulance arrived, they could see that she'd been dead for some time. And the paramedic who was there, he looked around and could see that there'd been an untidy search. Some drawers were open, some things were knocked over.
Items were strewn across the floor, drawers were open.
Here is a lady who's died with the cover over her head, with the arms raised above the head, and it looks like there's been a burglary that's taken place.
With police at the scene, suspicions grow that this is not a natural death, and the house is immediately cordoned off. But with no obvious injuries, how Jane died is still a mystery, which means detectives begin to theorise what could have happened to the pensioner.
Is it a burglary that's gone wrong? Is it Jane who's suffered a heart attack following a burglary, or whether she has passed away and then a burglary has happened afterwards, or whether this is somebody who has murdered Jane and then burgled the bungalow afterwards?
The first step for detectives is to establish how Jane died.
I received a phone call from the duty detective inspector who said they had a death. They weren't 100% happy with it, and they would value my opinion on what was going on.
Dr. Hamilton attends the scene, and as well as the unusual way Jane has been tucked into her bed, his suspicions are raised further.
And the most immediately concerning thing was that her nightdress appeared to be pulled up, and that seemed very unusual for somebody who'd simply died in their sleep. But this just doesn't look right, it doesn't look normal.
As suspicions are raised that she could have been the victim of a sexual attack, Jane is taken for post-mortem. But almost immediately, everything changes.
This is HFM.
Police have launched a murder inquiry after an elderly woman was found dead at her home in Fleckney. The body was discovered in a bungalow on Elizabeth Road. It's thought the victim died at some point during Saturday evening or in the early hours of Sunday.
Whilst transporting Jane, a shocking piece of evidence has been found.
As we took the body, a tongue bar fell from one of the creases in the skin. Ms. Hings didn't have a tongue piercing, so we have evidence of somebody else very close to her body. That ultimately became one of the most important pieces of evidence in catching the killer.
On a quiet Sunday morning in the village of Fleckney in Leicestershire, residents are waking up to disturbing news of a possible murder on their doorstep.
This is HFM.
Further tests are being carried out to try to determine what killed an elderly woman in her own home in Fleckney. It prompted police to launch a murder inquiry following the discovery of her body in the property on Elizabeth Road. There were signs of a disturbance in her bungalow, which has led officers to believe she may have been the victim of a burglary.
72-year-old Jane Hings has been found dead by her carers early on a Sunday morning. Her house has been burgled, and there's signs she has been sexually assaulted. Police are treating her death as suspicious and have cordoned off the scene.
There was police tape from the tree round to the lamppost. You couldn't get to where, if you can just see that red car behind this thing, that was all blocked off as well, because that's the back of her house. It's not something we expected to ever happen in Fleckney. It's such a quiet village, a nice village. I was gobsmacked. There's something could happen like this, you know what I mean, on my doorstep, literally on my doorstep. And for people that I knew.
It's a place where you can leave your doors and windows open. Everybody knows everybody. But, you know, this sent shockwaves through the community. And I think that a lot of people would have felt generally scared.
With the village inundated with police vehicles, Jane's loved ones are also confronted with the news of her death.
I'd arranged to go over to James on the Sunday morning to take Paddy for a walk. And as usual, I was running late. and I'd had no phone call, which was really strange. And then I pulled into the close where she lived and just saw loads of police cars, police vans, forensics, and yeah, that's when I found out. So I last spoke to Jane the night before. I was supposed to go and see her that day. I'd been on holiday, so I hadn't seen her for a couple of weeks. And we were on the phone for about an hour. I miss Jane. I miss the phone calls. There was so much she could have talked about her life, and I didn't get to hear any of it. And my phone is so deadly quiet all the time.
Whilst moving Jane's body, pathologists have discovered a tongue bar in her groin.
The investigation then shifted from, is this a burglary that's gone wrong, to this is an old lady who's been murdered and seriously sexually assaulted in her home.
That tongue bar was put into an evidence bag immediately. Everyone knew that this was potentially important. That went straight off. It was fast-tracked through the DNA lab.
As detectives wait for the DNA results, upmost on their mind is that this might not be an isolated incident.
One of our first lines of inquiry is to research cases of a similar nature, and we conducted a number of checks looking at anybody who was already convicted and in prison who could have been on day release for the same offence. But then this case was one of a kind. Not only the nature of it, but the brutal nature of it.
Immediately, door-to-door inquiries begin.
When officers initially attended the scene, they tried to identify people who would know Jane the last time that she was seen or spoken to.
Officers investigate whether Jane had any enemies in the village.
When we looked at Jane's past, there was no fallouts with anybody. There was nothing to indicate somebody with a vendetta, somebody with a grudge, any past history with anybody which would tell us this person has a long-running grudge against Jane and would want ill of her.
But locals have their own suspicions.
When the police first came, they said there was no sign of forced entry or anything like that, so it was obvious that it was somebody that she knew.
And it appears that whoever stole from Jane took some of her most precious items. Her wedding ring and a necklace are missing, along with her mobile phone, handbag, and £200. But police find an item they suspect doesn't belong to her.
Behind that bed, between the headboard and the wall, was a baseball cap found on the floor.
It was a designer cap, something that didn't belong to Jane.
The question police want to know is, whose hat is it? And did its owner have anything to do with Jane's death? With the post-mortem results in, it's apparent Jane has suffered a brutal attack.
Really tellingly, she had lacerations, she had tears, both to her anus and to her vagina. The external injuries were really focused around the mouth and the nose and the upper neck area. Ms. Hings didn't have that many injuries on her body, but what there was told a story. There was a little linear graze, a scratch on her neck, and we know that her necklace was missing. It would certainly fit with somebody having pulled that necklace and it scraping across the skin. The most important thing that the post-mortem brought out in itself was that there was no natural cause for her to die. No natural cause for Miss Hings to be dead. In addition, there was some quite disturbing bruising around her jawline, around her mouth, something that really makes you think we have to be sure that this woman hasn't been strangled or smothered.
Less than 24 hours after Jane was discovered, the fast turnaround DNA profile from the tongue bar is returned from the lab.
That profile was put into the DNA database, and they soon had a match. They had a hit, and that match was Craig Kehoe.
26-year-old Craig Kehoe's DNA was on file, as he was known to the local police as a petty criminal. Now, he was part of a major manhunt.
Craig Kehoe was a local lad. He grew up in the area. He still lived in the area. Craig led a transient lifestyle. He doesn't have a car, he didn't have a phone, he didn't have a job, he didn't claim benefits. So trying to work out where he lived in the Fleckney area meant we had to do a lot of inquiries at a fast pace, but in a discreet way as well.
Police managed to trace Craig to a caravan which was on the outskirts of Fleckney, but not very far from where Jane lived.
Once we'd identified that he was living in a caravan, we sent officers there.
Someone in the caravan! Police! Open the door! Police, open the door! Someone with the dark hair in there.
And there was a slight standoff of about 30 seconds where the caravan was surrounded and Craig took some time coming to the door before he's arrested.
Right, hands behind back.
Right, at this moment in time, I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. The rest is necessary for prompt and effective investigation. You don't have to say anything. May harm to face. Do not mention one question. Something which you later will learn in the court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand everything I've said to you?
Craig is taken into custody as detectives try to build a picture of the young man they suspect murdered Jane.
He didn't live far from Jane. He was a former factory worker. He'd been in trouble for burglary, a few break-ins and stealing from his parents and from a friend. But he wasn't known as a major criminal. He wasn't known for anything as horrific as this.
As Craig's DNA was identified on the tongue bar and in her bungalow, detectives want to know how it got there. Craig is interviewed under caution.
When was the last time you saw her then?
The last time I saw her was Sunday night.
Okay. What time would that have been?
I got there for about 10:30.
You got there at 10:30?
Yeah.
That's PM?
Well, 10:30 at night.
At night? Okay. So if we take from 10:30 at night then, through to when you left at 11,
yeah.
Tell me exactly in detail what happened.
Well, I was watching a little film on the TV, and then she asked me to have sex with her again.
Just tell me exactly what she said to you about having sex.
She just said, Craig, will you have sex with me? And then, well, the first time it started off was about a month ago, and I was in the house, and then she just came into the front room naked, and then she was like, Craig, come and do it with me and I'll pay you.
He offered the reason that his DNA was inside of Jane and inside the scene was because Jane had paid him for sex.
Okay, and how much did she pay you?
Yeah, she paid me £200.
£200.
In the village of Fleckney in Leicestershire, police have arrested 25-year-old Craig Kehoe on suspicion of the murder of Jane Hings.
You don't have to say anything. May harm to face. Do not mention one question. Something which you later will learn in the court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand everything I've said to you?
Could this local lad really be responsible for the rape and murder of a 72-year-old pensioner? The news has sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community.
How could somebody that I'd grown up with all these years could be physically capable of doing something like that? I felt sick and it was horrible. Like, who does think something like that? To such, you know what I mean? You hear about it, but she was an old lady. She was old. He was a young lad.
Kehoe has been taken into custody and is being interviewed under caution. With his DNA found on the victim and at the scene, detectives want to know how Craig knows Jane. And he has an explanation.
I was walking through the village and I saw this lady and her shopping bag broke and I helped her and then I carried it to the house with her.
Craig told us in an interview that he met Jane when he was down the shops and that she asked him to pick up some shopping for him and offered him some money for it and then asked him to walk her dog Paddy as well.
But Craig alleges that it wasn't just household chores Jane was paying him for.
And then another time, she's asked me to have sex with her for money. And it happened a month ago, the first time. And then she's asked me to come back a month later. And then it happened again.
Key to the police investigation was the tongue piercing found in Jane's groin.
Have you got any piercings?
I got my ear pierced.
Your ear pierced? Okay. Anywhere else?
Yeah, tongue pierced.
Your tongue?
Craig goes on to admit that he'd been with Jane the night she died, saying he arrived at her house around 10:30 p.m.
Tell me exactly in detail what happened.
Well, we were watching a little film on the TV, and then she asked me to have sex with her again, and she's like, "I'll pay you more this time." I was like, "Okay." I didn't think anything of it, and that was it really. And she said she felt sick, and then I left her.
Craig's detailed account that he had sex with Jane and left her very much alive turns the investigation on its head.
During the course of his interviews, he came up with an explanation as to what happened. And I have to say, it was so bizarre.
Craig also suggested that Jane, whilst alive, was unwell when he left.
What he was saying was that she'd become a little bit wobbly and a little bit unwell, and had then gone back to her bed. He'd then closed the door, and obviously whatever happened afterwards was someone else. Some stranger, no doubt having seen that the door was open, would have gone in there, burgled her, and perhaps killed her. And so that might possibly have been an explanation for what happened.
The interviewing officers had to keep an open mind, but had to probe and get as much detail from him as possible to find out whether it was right or not.
Was Craig telling the truth? Was Jane alive when he left? And so was it someone else who sexually assaulted and killed her? Forensics carry out a detailed search for additional DNA or fingerprints on Jane or in the bungalow.
There was nothing else from the scene, from Jane, from the post-mortem which identified anybody else other than Craig. We'd had all of these things examined and they only pointed at Craig Keogh and did not point to anybody else.
With no one else in the frame, Craig's movements on the night in question are investigated.
Craig had been on a night out in Oadby, a nearby town.
I think it was between 8:30 he came in that night. Remember it well because Leicester City had played Liverpool on that night, so we had a fair few in. He stood out straight away because he had his baseball cap the other way around and he was just bouncing up and down.
Staff at the pub said that he appeared agitated, aggressive, and almost as if he was up for a fight. They said he was high on drink and drugs.
Now, this was crucially important evidence because in his interviews, he'd said that by 10:30 that evening, he was sitting in Jane Hing's living room in Fleckney, watching a war film and having a drink with her. But that was a lie. He was out with his friends. We were able by that process to show that he'd taken cocaine, that he was offering to sell other people cocaine, and that he was complaining about how boring the evening was.
As doubt is cast on Keogh's version of events, police trace his movements after he leaves the pub. He's next seen arriving back in Fleckney at just after 1 a.m.
His friends say that the last time they saw him was when the taxi dropped him off, and they assumed he was going home.
But Keogh walks in the opposite direction of his caravan, heading in the direction of Jane's bungalow.
We knew from CCTV that the suspect had walked to Jane's house wearing a baseball cap, and when they were walking away they didn't have it on, and we could see that.
Detectives believe this places Keogh in Jane's bungalow around 1:15 a.m. And when he returns home, he's captured again.
We see him going back into his caravan, carrying something. Now, he goes out again, and he returns out around 2:30 in the morning for another 15 minutes or so, and we are certain that he went back to Jane Hing's house in that period of time. We don't know what he did.
The following morning, Craig is again seen on camera.
The morning after he was seen walking along the street, he was captured on CCTV with a black bin bag.
He's spotted again a few minutes later, but the bag has vanished. What did he dispose of? The police believe it was some of Jane's belongings, but a search of the area reveals nothing.
This is HFM.
It's 5 o'clock. This is HFM News. Detectives have been given more time to continue questioning a man on suspicion of murder following the discovery of a pensioner dead in her bungalow in Fleckney on Sunday morning. Officers also believe items were stolen from Miss Hings's bungalow in a black bin liner. They're appealing for villagers to check their gardens and outbuildings in case it's been discarded there. A post-mortem examination has so far failed to identify her cause of death.
With help from the public and CCTV, police are able to piece together Keogh's movements 24 hours after Jane's death. Friends described Craig as splashing his cash, buying them drinks and himself a new tongue bar.
He tried to get rid of Jane's jewellery in trying to sell it. He got rid of her handbag. He was trying to get rid of every last bit of evidence that would connect him to Jane.
He went into Leicester city centre and he actually went to a pawnbroker's. He sold her jewellery for about £100 when the items of jewellery were valued around £1,000.
With enough evidence that Keogh stole items from Jane and had raped her, detectives also believe they have a killer on their hands. But proving he murdered Jane was going to be their biggest challenge.
So far as murder was concerned, we had no cause of death. We were unable to show how she died, whether it was deliberate or accidental, forensically at that stage.
In the village of Fleckney, 25-year-old Craig Keogh has been charged with burglary, murder and the rape of pensioner Jane Hings. The news that Jane was sexually assaulted in her home has been made public.
The community were on edge already, knowing that an old lady had been murdered in her home, but then once the true nature of it came out, people were really worried.
When I found out that information, it just floored me. It played on my mind all night. You know, a woman of that age, why could that happen?
I'd say the villagers would be distressed because a majority of them are similar sort of age to Miss Hings, and you know, and there's quite a few vulnerable people out there as well, and it obviously upset them, but also put a bit of fear into them as well that this could happen on their doorstep.
Within days of his arrest, Keogh is brought before a judge and the charges read.
He pleaded not guilty to all the charges, so that was murder, 2 counts of rape and burglary.
Keogh is remanded in custody and a date set for his trial. But the work of the prosecution is only just beginning.
This was horrific violence perpetrated on a very frail old lady whilst she was still alive. And there was then the added complication of trying to prove how she died.
So one of Craig Keogh's lines of defence actually referred to him knowing Jane Hings, and yeah, he said that she paid him for sex, and that was a reason that he went around, and he claimed she was still alive when he left her bungalow on that night.
Experts believe that Jane has been smothered with a pillow, and proving it was Keogh is imperative to the case.
The DNA on the pillows was of saliva, and so we could show that Jane's saliva was on the pillows. That was all.
Typically with a material object, you can't get fingerprints from it. And it's really difficult. For us as investigators, we sat there believing that the pillowcases were our murder weapon. How could we prove that?
With concern that Keogh might get away on a technicality, the police and prosecution reach out to forensic specialists.
Now, our pillowcases had been sat in the bottom of an evidence bag, sat in the exhibit store for, at this point, 4 months. They weren't laid out flat like you'd see in a movie or anything like this. This is a pillowcase shoved in the bottom of an evidence bag.
But as we got nearer to trial, we discovered a new scientific development.
Leicestershire Police said to me they had a pillowcase that they were interested in trying to develop some fingerprints on. They wanted to know whether a novel process I'd been researching was appropriate for this type of exhibit. I recommended that they tried vacuum metal deposition, and I also directed them towards Gloucestershire Police, who had a vacuum metal deposition machine that they could use and a trained operator, which is probably the best technique that we're aware of that gives you a chance of getting fingerprints on fabrics.
Vacuum metal deposition involves vaporizing gold and zinc in a vacuum chamber. The metallic particles are attracted to the fabric and form a negative image of finger marks wherever it has been touched.
So what you have here is the image of the pillowcase as it's come out of the vacuum metal deposition machine. These dark regions where you have quite a lot of zinc deposition, and you have these light regions where zinc simply hasn't deposited. It shows whereabouts the pillowcase has been gripped, and it also enables you to say, well, it's been touched there, so you can then target other techniques such as DNA recovery for those techniques.
We were able, therefore, to show that the pillow had been held in a position that you wouldn't hold a pillow ordinarily in order to put it over Jane Hings' head to kill her.
So that proved our murder weapon. We had Keogh's finger marks on the short edge and Jane's saliva in the middle of the pillow.
But the question is, would it be enough to convict Keogh? The trial begins at Birmingham Crown Court, and Jane's friends come face to face with Keogh.
Craig was just deadpan through the whole entire time. Not an ounce of remorse, not any kind of emotion. He showed nothing.
When Craig sat in the dock, he was expressionless. It was difficult to really see any signs of emotion.
Obviously, Jane's friends are of her age, so are a lot older and didn't want to go and sit through all of that. So I went and sat for her. I didn't want Craig to think that nobody cared about her. I wanted to be seen that, you know, she meant something to somebody.
Craig had denied all along that he was responsible for raping and murdering Jane Hings. In fact, his version of events was at complete odds with the prosecution's case, the police case. He had said that he had gone to see Jane to have sex. He said that they had watched a film together that night, a war film. Checks were made, and there was no war film on TV. It was a complete and utter lie.
As the trial unfolds, the defence tried to paint a picture of Jane.
Craig Keogh was describing Jane Hings as being a sexually promiscuous, drunken woman who liked nothing more than spending her pension money on having intercourse with a young man. We discovered she didn't drink alcohol. There was no alcohol in her bloodstream after her death.
So the jury were then shown all the mobility aids that Jane had in the house, the fact that she couldn't walk between rooms without needing a walking stick or a frame.
So the idea of her being interested in active sexual activity was laughable.
Central to the prosecution case is proving that the sexual contact was non-consensual.
So we instructed an expert in sexual injuries to examine her body. And as a result of that, we were able to show that the sexual activity was not consensual activity, and it would have caused her significant amounts of pain, and it happened when she was alive.
And it was for this reason they believe Keogh decided to kill Jane.
She must have cried out when that happened, and he must have wanted not to be caught and to complete the act. And we know he did complete the act because there was semen within her body. And I expect that during the course of that sexual assault upon her, he decided to kill her because she wouldn't shut up.
Establishing that Keogh had the motive and opportunity to kill Jane, the prosecution introduces what they believe is the murder weapon.
The scientists went the extra mile on this one because they could show that finger marks left by Keogh were on the short, straight edges at the side, and they were gripped like this and applied. And they then took it one step further to look for the amylase staining, that's the protein staining in the middle, to show that Jane had exhaled a lot and it given out a lot of moisture from her breath, indicating that that's where she was smothered. And then when the scientists came to court to explain it, the jury was sat there like, oh wow, this is really impactful.
With the prosecution evidence built against him, Keogh remained silent.
Craig sat there very quiet. He chose not to give evidence. He chose not to be cross-examined by prosecutor, and he showed no remorse, even when the horrific details were read out of what he had done.
Craig Keogh could not offer any evidence which the jury could look at and say that he was not guilty. He couldn't offer any alibi, and he couldn't offer any plausible explanation as to why this had happened or why he was suspected of it.
After 5 days, the jury is sent to deliberate. Presented with all the evidence, they have to decide whether the marks at the edge of the pillow and all the new scientific data prove that the young man in front of them is a murderer.
There are two choices for a jury here. Either he went into that house and raped her and burgled the property and then left, and a random stranger came in and smothered her, or the person who raped her smothered her. That's the choice.
Even though you've listened to the whole trial and you know he's guilty, the evidence says he's guilty, those minutes, hours of waiting to hear them words, it's still nerve-wracking, you know, because they could come back with not guilty.
After 4 hours, the jury returns.
They came back and unanimously said that he was guilty of 2 counts of rape, murder and burglary.
When the jury came back, he was plainly shocked. Craig Keogh stood there, and when sentence was imposed, he stood there with an element of resignation, but he didn't seem at any stage to show any kind of remorse. No sadness for her, no sadness for his own family, who appeared to be very decent people. From the beginning to the end, it seemed to me he was entirely focused on himself.
Keogh was given a life sentence and will only be eligible for parole after 32 years. But for all involved, this case has taken its toll.
When I went into Jane Hing's house, I was struck by the peace and tranquility in which she'd lived her life. She was a very simple lady. Beside her bed on one side was her Bible and a crucifix. And on the other side, as she had gone to bed, no doubt like every other night, she'd left her teeth on the side of the bed. And imagining just being in your own bedroom, in the comfort of your own home, and having a young, strong man, plainly intoxicated and under the influence of drunks, coming into your room about 1:15 in the morning, waking you from your sleep, must have been terrifying. That, I think, stays with me.
This case will stick with me. It's one that the community will remember for a long time. It's one that the police officers who went to will remember for a long time.
I've covered numerous murder trials over the last 25 years. The rape of anyone is distressing, it's shocking, but this was particularly shocking because it involved the rape of an elderly woman.
I've been asked many times, what are my feelings towards Craig? And I have none, is the simple answer. I don't hate him because that's an emotion. I literally have no emotion towards him. But to think of what he did, it broke my heart to try and think about the fear that would have been going through her mind at the time. And then to be smothered with her own pillow. Jane was cremated and I put her ashes in an urn that sits on my mantelpiece so she can watch over Paddy every day until the day that he sadly joins her, in which case I will get him cremated and scatter their ashes someplace nice.
Are you gorgeous?
So they can be together again.
A vibrant young woman with a bright future.
She just was like a magnet. She was very, very pretty, but also very smart.
Is the victim of a truly disturbing murder.
He'd been struck on the head many times.
It's kind of the horror story.
The body itself appeared to have been washed. Jewelry had been put on her after the fact.
She had been staged for this suspect's desires. Who could have done this? Could it be somebody who likes her, somebody who has a fantasy over her?
Detectives hunt for a deranged killer.
We noticed bloodied palm print.
Police had collected about 100 different print impressions.
We could be looking for a serial killer.
Just when it looks like justice may never be served.
It was extremely frustrating.
A stunning discovery points to a murderer in their midst.
When we found out who it was like, are you kidding? Nobody could believe it.
Less than an hour outside Los Angeles, Irvine, California is a peaceful community with a coastal vibe.
Irvine is very, very pretty. It is pretty much the hub of Orange County. The ocean's only 10 minutes away, and this is where everybody wanted to be.
Irvine has always been considered to be a very safe city and has not been known for violence.
On May 14th, 1979, Irvine's sense of safety is shattered when a man calls 911 to say he can't get a hold of his 22-year-old girlfriend, Savannah Anderson.
Earlier that day, her boyfriend went over to her residence to meet her at about 6 o'clock. He couldn't get any response at the door.
He went back home for a while, couldn't get a hold of her still.
He called the police department about 7:25 p.m. It was a welfare check. Her boyfriend indicated that she had not been feeling well. and so there was a concern that it could be a health issue. When the officer arrived, he met her boyfriend, Bill Mills, and another man, Ken Bergenson, who identified himself as her boss.
They explained they'd both come to the apartment to try to find out if she was okay because nobody had been able to get a hold of her that day.
I was very fortunate to work with Savannah. Savannah was always prompt, and she didn't come that day. All day long, it was like trying to get a hold of her, no answers. By the end of the day, we were very concerned something might have happened because that wasn't like her.
The officer found the apartment was in fact locked up tight. There was no key available from the apartment office. The officer found out that a bedroom window nearby was unlocked from the inside. He was able to open that bedroom window.
When the officer made entry, he was able to see a woman with a lot of blood around her, lying in bed, towels wrapped around her face and head. She was cold to the touch.
Both Savannah's boyfriend and boss are taken to the station for questioning, while homicide investigators are called to the scene.
When I walked in, it appeared to me that there was a struggle, a fight, and it was very clear that she was attacked on the bed, and she laid on the bed for some time due to the amount of blood that had pooled in that area. A lot of blood splattering against the back of the wall and the headboard.
She also had towels over her face. After the towels were taken off, her face was found out to be beaten very severely, excessively.
The towels were significant. It tells you that the killer may have known her and didn't want to look at what they've done.
It appeared that the body of the victim had been beaten with something hard.
She had multiple defensive marks on her arms, her hands, nail marks around the neck area, which would indicate that she also had a ligature that had been placed around her neck.
The legs were slightly raised as if some sexual activity may have occurred there.
Perhaps she was the victim of a sexual assault.
The degree of violence to Savannah's body was unusual. Did somebody do it because they were angry at her? If they were angry at her, is that because they knew her, they loved her, they hated her?
Based on the state of the body, police believe Savannah was likely killed in the early hours of the morning. Looking closer, several details strike investigators as highly unusual.
Savannah had some jewelry on her. There was a necklace around her neck, and the clasp was at the front. There's also a watch on her arm that looked like it had just been put on there loosely.
We were surprised to see that those items were still intact on her based upon the brutality of her attacker. So it appeared that he may have just put those items back on her.
The body itself appeared to have been washed, as there's very little blood on the skin surface of the victim.
We noticed drag marks from the bed onto the carpet leading into the bathroom. Inside the bathroom, there was diluted blood with water around the sink area and also the bathtub.
She looked like she had been cleaned up and set in a particular position on the bed. It was staged for this suspect's desires. And I think that was important to get an idea of what this type of person was willing to do to Savannah's body, put things on her, put clothes on her, whatever.
It was very unusual for any type of murder, in my opinion. It looks like somebody wanted to make it look like she was fine and nothing was wrong.
Police find some important clues the killer left behind.
We noticed bloodied palm print leading from the bedroom into the bathroom. Palm prints are identifiable just like fingerprints. There were smudged, bloodied fingerprints on the toilet seat.
They were basically the only way that we'd be able to find out who the killer might have been. There was no DNA at the time.
Detectives find no murder weapon or any sign of forced entry.
We made the determination that the killer may have been known by Savannah and let him in through the front door. Another theory was through an unlocked open window.
After finishing up at the scene, detectives break the news of Savannah's death to her loved ones.
The parents lived in Utah. When I spoke to Savannah's mother on the phone, she was devastated by this. It was her only child. It's probably hard for most people to realize, first of all, what it's like to lose a child, let alone the only child you have. Savannah's mother said Savannah had made a collect call to her about 10 o'clock the previous day on Mother's Day evening. They had talked on the phone for about 2 hours. Savannah was very happy, good mood. That must have made it even more so difficult.
When I found out what had happened to Savannah, we were all totally shocked. My heart just hurt so much. How very sad this beautiful young lady, her life was gone, is very senseless, very, very hard to understand.
Born in 1956, Savannah Anderson grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and had big dreams.
She was 22 when she moved to Irvine. She came here looking for a better opportunity. She was very independent, and she wanted to do it on her own. I met Savannah when she was working here for Commercial Credit. Savannah was a secretary for the operations manager. She just was like a magnet. She was very, very pretty. I remember when people did come in the office, especially the men, she did attract attention.
Savannah was flattered, but she did have a boyfriend, Bill Mills, whom she met 3 months after moving to California.
She was more of a private person into herself as far as not one to just open up and tell everybody what she was doing. She was definitely on the shy side. When I found out what had happened to Savannah, I felt angry and just crushed and so hurt. My first thought was just how tragic this was. I just can't imagine.
It's kind of the horror story. Who could have done this? Could it be somebody close to her, somebody who knows her, somebody who likes her, somebody who has a fantasy over her? When you have a brutal killing like Savannah's case, detectives immediately looked for the people that are close to her, her boyfriend.
The fact that Bill, the boyfriend, was the one that called the police, is he innocently calling the police here because he doesn't know that something had happened to her? Or is he the one who may have done it, so he contacted the police to say, gee, something might be wrong, with the hopes that the police will go ahead and discover the crime and then say, well, it can't be the boyfriend because he called us here. Could it be almost a way out to try to point the finger away from you? It's just something you have to look into.
Coming up, police question the grieving boyfriend to see if he has something to hide.
His attorney advised him not to take a polygraph.
And detectives uncover more suspects.
Why is he here now at this time? That was suspicious.
Somebody was lying.
Another crime turns the investigation on its head.
This individual was responsible for 5 murders. Perhaps she was the victim of this killer.
And the perpetrator's identity leaves everyone in shock.
It was absolutely devastating when we found out who it was.
Police investigating the gruesome murder of 22-year-old Savannah Anderson have their first suspect, her boyfriend, Bill Mills.
When you have a crime of passion where somebody is murdered, there are definitely times when a boyfriend who just got angry and upset did the crime.
The first thing we did was began meeting with Bill Mills so we could understand better about Savannah, his relationship.
Bill tells police he and Savannah started dating 6 months ago, and he was in love.
They had met each other in another apartment community. They had gotten along well.
He was about 9 years older than Savannah. In talking with him, had learned that he had just asked her to marry him.
Police are curious if something came up to disrupt the couple's plans for the future.
It was a large, violent crime scene. did he do it because he was angry at her?
Bill tells investigators he last saw Savannah a day earlier on May 13th.
They had lunch together, and then he spent the day over at her apartment. During the interview with Bill Mills, we found out that Savannah and he did have sex that day. So that would be important later on in case there was semen found inside of her.
Bill told me on the 13th he left her apartment at about 10 p.m.
Once he did leave, what happened to him? Can anybody account for his activity after he apparently left her apartment?
He said he went home, he went to bed, and then to work the following day.
Bill says he and Savannah had plans on the 14th after they both got off work.
He went to her apartment about 6, knocked, couldn't raise her. He went back home for a while, then Bill Mills went ahead and contacted the police department.
Bill denies having anything to do with Savannah's death.
It appeared that Bill Mills was really in love with her, thought it was a very serious relationship. He was very happy with her.
Bill was cooperative. He tried to assist us as much as he could.
But there is one request Bill won't comply with.
There is a red flag. He was asked if he would be willing to take a polygraph. He contacted an attorney, and his attorney advised him not to take one.
We did ask if we could see his body, his hands, his arms, see if there's any indications of a struggle with anybody. But his body was clean. We asked him if we could go ahead and take his finger and palm prints. He agreed to let us do that.
It will be weeks before the results come in. In the meantime, detectives are forced to let Bill go. Next, they move on to another man in Savannah's life.
Part of the investigation and process was to meet with her boss, Ken Bergeson, who had been at the crime scene. In speaking with him, he said he had known her in Salt Lake and had offered her a job locally here.
Ken Bergeson also said that he kind of considered himself a father figure to her. He helped her move. They had talked many times, been out for drinks, been out for lunch and different things.
Could Ken have wanted more than a professional relationship with Savannah?
Was anything going on romantically in the present day?
I asked Ken where he was the night of May 13th, and he indicated that he was with his wife that whole evening.
We did contact the wife to verify that, and there's no reason to believe that he was anywhere but at his home that night.
After the interview, we asked Ken to submit his prints so they could be compared against the crime scene.
We just let him go home that night after the interview.
The police questioned each one of us in the office. I worked for Ken Bergeson at the time. He was just such a nice guy and so concerned about her. She was living by herself, and she was just so beautiful. I just thought, somebody saw her. Somebody was either stalking her or something happened. But I was just so angry that somebody could possibly do something like this. It had to have been somebody I thought who was very sick.
There was nothing really that drew anyone's attention to any issues that Savannah had at work, and nothing came of it.
Police canvassed the apartment complex the next day, searching for witnesses.
We didn't find anyone that said that they'd heard any struggle or screams to corroborate when that attack may have occurred. There were 2 security guards that were assigned to the complex. It was a multi-unit under construction.
So after I got the names of the security personnel who worked that night, which was about a week after we originally responded out there, I talked to the security guard first who worked the midnight to 6:30 shift. His name was Chuck Doyle.
According to Doyle, security was hired to ensure the residents were safe and to overlook any construction sites and that sort of thing for theft.
Chuck tells investigators on a usual shift he would drive through the complex and also patrol by foot.
I asked him how he found out about the murder of the woman, and he said he found out through the company. I asked him if he knew the lady who lived there, showed him 2 pictures, and he picked out the picture of Savannah Anderson.
When asked about his dealings with Savannah, Chuck's answer gives investigators cause for concern.
He indicated about a month prior that he'd helped Savannah gain entry into her apartment and slid a window open for her.
It was notable that Mr. Doyle had said he was aware that at least at that time one of the windows was unlocked.
Doyle said, "You'll find my fingerprints on Savannah's window, and this is the reason why." Immediately, we printed him. It really made me zero in on him as a potential suspect.
A week after Savannah Anderson was found bludgeoned to death in her bed, security guard Chuck Doyle has drawn suspicion after admitting that his fingerprints are likely on her unlocked window.
She had locked herself out of her apartment before, contacted him while he was on the site to see if he could help her get into the apartment. The security did not have any pass keys. He found that a window was unlocked. He was able to slide the window open. He also said that he didn't go inside. Now, that could be for a couple of reasons. Could be perfectly innocent that he didn't go inside. Could also be to say, well, I didn't go inside if he may have somehow be involved in the death.
Had Chuck slipped in through the same unlocked window to kill Savannah? Police press him for his movements that night.
Chuck Doyle said that he reported for duty on the 14th at midnight, or was supposed to, indicated that he was about 10 minutes, 15 minutes late.
He was supposed to replace a security guard named Bob Sellers.
He drove by Savannah's and saw her talking on the phone. He thought maybe that was around 12:15 or so, 12:20, but was not certain.
He went and parked next to Bob Sellers' car. About 12:30, he estimated, Sellers approached. He got daily reports from Sellers, and then Sellers went ahead and got in his car and drove off.
When detectives ask what happened next, Chuck's answer raises even more suspicion.
He said he drove around a while, went back to the carport, and went to sleep, which would seem very odd.
He thought he probably nodded off for a while.
Doyle says that he was awoken by a car door slam. It was Sellers who had returned and invited him to breakfast. Doyle says it was maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. They went to breakfast at Spire's restaurant, a 24-hour cafe.
The cafe is just 10 minutes from the complex.
Doyle said that he was dropped off by Sellers at about 2:30 in the morning.
Chuck says the rest of his shift was uneventful, and he clocked out at 6:30 a.m.
There's just something really unusual about the sequence of events that's being described by Doyle.
Investigators are left with more questions than answers. Did Savannah die on Chuck's watch? Or was he the one who killed her? Hoping for clarity and to corroborate Chuck's story, they turn to the other security guard, Robert Sellers.
Robert Sellers enlisted into the Marine Corps at age 17. He's 22 now.
He was assigned that day to work from about 4 in the afternoon, and he was supposed to get off at about midnight that night. I asked him if he knew who Savannah Anderson was. He said he had talked to both her and her boyfriend that evening.
Sellers told me that he thought he saw Savannah around 10 p.m. on the phone.
Robert confirms that Chuck was late for work, so he didn't leave the apartment complex until around 12:30 a.m.
After leaving Doyle, he then went home, showered.
As a U.S. Marine, he was supposed to go to a Marine base at 6 o'clock in the morning.
He decided it wasn't worth trying to go to sleep, so he thought, well, I'll just go out to breakfast with Doyle. So that's when he returned.
Sellers told me that he came back to the complex about 3:30, which is an hour and a half or 2 hours after what Doyle recalled this happening. So there was this inconsistency between the both of them about what time they must have gone to the restaurant. Sellers said there's a waitress named Gail who waited on him. I took note of that. At the end of the Sellers interview, we asked if he would go ahead and give us finger palm prints, which he agreed to.
Investigators hope the autopsy report can help them pinpoint Savannah's time of death.
According to the coroner's report, Savannah Anderson died at approximately 2 a.m. on May 14th. The cause of death was strangulation.
She'd been struck on the head many times, found multiple contusions on her face. There is broken fingernails, a broken jaw, cracked teeth.
We did have biological fluids, semen that was found, but DNA was not in existence at the time, so we didn't have that tool.
My first thought was just how horrible to die like that. I cried and I was just very upset, just thinking that something like that had happened to a person that was just so lovely. It's just terrible.
If Savannah was killed at 2 a.m., which security guard is telling the truth? Was Chuck really off-site like he claimed? Or was Robert right, meaning Chuck was at the apartment complex when the murder took place?
There was a wide gap and discrepancy between their two stories and timing. So the two were brought in together to try and determine if someone was mistaken about times.
They both basically stuck to their stories. I wasn't sure which either timeline might have been correct, whether it might have been Doyle's or Sellers, because they were just too far apart. So we thought at that time somebody was lying.
Detectives are investigating the disturbing murder of Savannah Anderson. The two security guards from her apartment complex are unable to agree where they were at 2 a.m. when Savannah was killed.
The timing is very sketchy between what Doyle says and what we learned from Sellers.
This is raising a lot of flags to me, because why don't they know where they were and what time they were?
Going over time discrepancies, Doyle said, well, I slept, I could be mistaken, I'm not sure. So Sellers seemed to be more credible time-wise.
According to Robert Sellers, Chuck was on duty at 2 a.m. and the pair only went to Spire's restaurant around 3:30 a.m.
I asked one of the patrol guys to go ahead and try to contact any waitress there that might have been named Gail to see if she recalled the security guys coming in there at all. They weren't able to find a Gail that worked at the Spire's restaurant, so we could not identify that particular part of the story. It looked like the best chance of us determining who the suspect was going to be through the fingerprint and palm print evidence left behind. At this time, we already had fingerprints and palm prints from the boyfriend, Bill Mills, the boss, Ken Bergerson, and from the two security guards, Chuck Doyle and Bob Sellers. And I felt that if we can find out if any of those were the palm prints, that's going to be the resolution of our case. We'd be able to determine who had done it. So we sent them away with high hopes that we're going to be able to resolve the case once we get the results back.
While waiting for the results, investigators dig deeper into Savannah's life, hoping something will point to her killer.
Savannah seemed to be a very likable person who had, from all reports, a good mind, good IQ, personable, funny, one that you would be very happy to have as a daughter.
She was very sweet, very sophisticated, quiet. She had very strong values and morals. You know, she was just not one of those that was going to be out looking for trouble. Just how she went and how young she went is so tragic. Our world is it's cruel.
We interviewed neighbors. Savannah had been at the apartment complex about 6 weeks. Her contacts, friends were very limited. What I learned through investigation was Savannah had moved deliberately for the safety of having security on the premises.
She really wanted a place that felt safe, and the fact that they had security, she loved that aspect of it. She felt really good about where she was going.
2 months after Savannah's death, police received the results of the finger and palm print analysis from the scene.
I was really hoping we heard back from the crime lab that it's going to be one of the guys we'd already talked to.
in terms of identification and finding and identifying that individual. It was everything.
None of the prints that came back were any of the fingerprints submitted from the bloody finger and palm prints. Really disappointing. Couldn't figure out why. It seemed like there should have been somebody in there that was responsible for it, yet the crime lab is telling us that these weren't the responsible parties at all. We thought we had some viable suspect, but we're told, nope, it's not them. Well, now what? Wow.
The results mean Savannah's boyfriend, her boss, and the 2 security guards are all cleared.
I was very discouraged, but thought, okay, we just haven't come across the perpetrator. He's out there. We'll find him. We'll identify him. I feel comfortable with that based on the palm print.
Detectives immediately looked for people in the area that maybe had criminal histories. They looked at people that had been arrested after that for similar type of break-in crimes. And if they had any suspicions whatsoever, they would get their palm print and their fingerprints, and they'd compare them to the crime scene prints and then rule them out if they didn't match.
3 months after the crime, police had collected about 100 different print impressions.
The palm prints didn't match. It was extremely frustrating to work through this.
With the case threatening to turn cold, detectives refuse to quit and take the case in a chilling new direction.
After going through potential suspects that were eliminated through the palm print, we began to examine that Savannah Anderson may be the victim of a serial killer known as the Bedroom Basher. This individual was responsible for 5 murders in the Orange County area at the time.
With a population under 2 million people, the number of attacks in a matter of months is troubling, and the similarities striking.
He would target young lone females between 17 and 35, ground floor apartments, open windows, open doors. Once inside, he would bludgeon, strangle, and sexually assault the females. So Savannah certainly fit that MO. And so we had to take a real strong look at perhaps she was the victim of this individual who had not been identified. We could be looking for a serial killer.
Detectives investigating the brutal murder of Savannah Anderson now believe she may have fallen victim to a serial killer.
Bedroom Basher went after females in homes or apartments in the Orange County area, raped them, in at least one case, killed somebody by bludgeoning them, which is what happened to Savannah.
Based upon the number of bludgeonings in Orange County, which were 5, we felt that there would be another that would take place.
5 months after Savannah's murder, investigators' worst fears are confirmed when the serial killer strikes again.
During this time, there was a woman in Orange County that had been attacked, believed by the Bedroom Basher, who survived and was able to give a description to the police. A composite drawing was made. She described the perpetrator as a male, olive skin, pockmarked face, long hair, mustache, dark eyes, in his late 20s, early 30s. A task force was created in Orange County. Flyers were disseminated to the public and to patrol units. It resulted in multiple contacts of people who believed they knew who this individual was. Unfortunately, none of those resulted in the apprehension of the individual.
A year after the murder, with no arrests and a killer on the loose, women in the area live in a constant state of terror.
The community was definitely impacted by this terrible murder. The news was full of these kind of things, and it did create fear among people. The fact that I was living so close by, it's a little scary.
Any female who resided by themselves took extra precautions to ensure that their windows, doors were in fact locked. Every possibility we looked at, we were unable to make any headway in determining what happened to Savannah Anderson. It was extremely frustrating. There was no one else that we were aware of that could provide any insight and/or potentially could be a suspect.
3 years after Savannah's murder, her case remains unsolved.
After you go through tips, leads, you step back, you re-examine, you say, what did I miss? It's got to be there. What did I miss?
I've started to believe that they just weren't going to find out. And that's terrible to think that something like that could happen and that this person is out there roaming around still.
2 more years pass until a rookie homicide detective takes a renewed interest in the case.
Savannah's case was the first cold case that I ever worked. I was familiar with it because I was in patrol when it happened, and I thought, well, nobody's looked at it for a while. Maybe I should look at it.
A friend of mine who knows Larry Montgomery very well calls him the evidence whisperer.
I was aware he was looking at the Savannah Anderson case, and at one point he came to me and we compared notes on it.
After combing through all the evidence, detectives revisit whether Savannah was a victim of the still unidentified bedroom basher.
The possibility that she was killed by a serial killer was definitely looked at. I was looking at anything that I could use to direct me to a possible suspect. I'm looking at what was done at the crime scene, what did the suspect do with the body, what was maybe in his mind because of what he did.
In comparing Savannah's murder to those committed by the bedroom basher, something just doesn't add up.
The one thing that stood out that was not similar was the cleaning up of the victim.
When I look at a crime scene like this, it's somebody who has a desire for Savannah. She appeared uninjured other than towels on top of her face. It wasn't the gore that he liked. He had to kill her in order to get her into a position where he could fantasize about having an actual relationship with her. This is a real girl now, as opposed to a dead body. The question in this case is, who did it? All the people we've looked at and that looked good were not matching the prints. There was one point where I started looking at the security guards to see what they were doing, because they were certainly involved in being there at the time. There were very big differences between what Doyle said happened and what Sellers said happened that night. And I thought that was very odd.
I thought at the time that I interviewed Doyle that one of the problems was he may have gone to sleep for a while. That would certainly account for the timeline being different, or his uneasiness in talking to us about that particular time period.
Police quickly locate Chuck and bring him in for another interview. His story about what happened the night of the murder is the same, but a few details stand out.
Doyle said that he got to the site probably 10 minutes late. He had not been able to find the person he was supposed to replace yet, Bob Sellers. About 12:30, Doyle saw Sellers come with a shirt in his hand, and I asked Doyle, did you ever ask him why he was late or why he didn't have his uniform shirt on? He said, no, he never asked him that. He just figures he's on his own time, so he could probably wear whatever he wants.
That's unusual. That right there's a big red flag.
That's not the only thing that raises alarm bells.
Doyle said that Sellers had commented about wanting to have a drink with Savannah. He thought she was very attractive.
Detectives asked Chuck Doyle if Robert Sellers ever confided anything else to him.
Regarding the relationship between Doyle and Sellers, they weren't buddies. They didn't do things together. They weren't really close friends.
Following this lead, investigators asked Chuck if it was common for them to go for breakfast during a shift, like they did the night of the murder.
They never did that before. So why is Sellers there on a night when he's supposed to leave soon to go to work at a Marine base, saying, hey, you want to go get something to eat? It didn't seem to fit. But I had the paperwork that shows that he had been exonerated. It wasn't his print. But I saw all kinds of things that Sellers did that was suspicious. Why is he here now at this time? It all fits if he came back and did something with the body at that time. It all made sense time-wise. And that's when I decided we need to find those prints again and see if we matched them properly.
5 years after Savannah Anderson was found murdered in her apartment, cold case investigators suspect her killer has been hiding in plain sight the entire time.
I've got a suspicion that this guy, Robert Sellers, might be the guy because there's too many lies or mistakes. He's already been exonerated, and I didn't believe the exoneration. We need to find somebody who's better than our sheriff's department, who's best in the world that we can get.
Robert's prints and the ones found at the crime scene are rushed to FBI headquarters.
The FBI discovered that some parts of the palm print were so thick with blood that it became a negative. It was the opposite of what it should be because of the thick blood. The thick blood looked like the ridges when really they were the valleys of the print.
The FBI reanalyzed the palm print and compared it to prints obtained from Robert.
The next day, the fingerprint lab at the FBI was able to identify in about 24 points of identification a positive identification of security guard Bob Sellers.
We have to arrest him now. Sellers, at the time that he was arrested, was living in a mobile home up in Brea at the police department. He was presented with evidence that his prints are in fact in the blood there. He didn't come forward right away, but very quickly after he had some lies, he did admit that he did everything that we thought he did.
He was obsessed with her. He found her very attractive. He thought perhaps by going into her apartment that he might convince her of some romantic get-together. He gained entry into her apartment through an unlocked window where he could hear her on the telephone talking with her mother. He stayed in the bedroom, hid as best possible while she talked in the kitchen living room area. Once she got off the phone at about a little after 12, she came into the bedroom. When she saw him, she was thinking, I have an intruder, a man in here, and I'm frightened. And he became frightened and realized that he had to silence her. He pulled out his baton and began striking her. He then went to strangulation.
During the struggle with Savannah, he said that his shirt got bloody, so he had to take it off. So when he went to see Doyle, he had his shirt in his hand so that his replacement would not see the blood on it.
And then he goes home, gets cleaned up, sneaks back in, and then goes into Savannah's apartment. Sellers wanted her sexually. He had to kill her to get that. He did talk about he wanted her to be clean, and so that's why he drug her into the shower and washed the blood off of her and took her back into the bedroom and wrapped her head in towels because she was so badly beaten. So then he just had a body that was clean and he could have his fantasy. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he's trying to sneak out, and that's when Doyle sees him, and that's when, at the spur of the moment, he has to all of a sudden pretend like, oh, I'm here to go to breakfast with you, okay? He almost seemed relieved when he finally was able to confess that he actually did kill Savannah.
On March 29th, 1984, Robert Sellers is charged with murder, rape, attempted rape, and burglary.
I think after 5 years, he thought he probably did get away with it. In that time, he got married, started a family. The anguish that he caused with Savannah Anderson's death, he didn't deserve having that extra 5 years.
On November 4th, 1986, Robert Sellers is found guilty of first-degree murder and a special circumstance of rape. But his lawyers win his appeal.
His conviction was overturned on a technicality. The fact that the prosecution could not prove that she was alive during the rape changed the verdict for a life without possibility of parole.
Instead of a retrial, prosecutors offer Robert a deal. He accepts to avoid the death penalty and pleads guilty to first-degree murder. He is sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Here you have a guard, a man, a Marine, placed there to protect the residents, and it turned out he is the one committing the crime. One would not expect the one who is protecting you to be your killer.
It was absolutely devastating when we found out who it was. The irony of it all was the fact that she moved to this beautiful apartment complex thinking she was going to be safe and secure. And it was the security guard that actually did it. It was like, are you kidding? Nobody could believe it.
Authorities don't find anything to link Robert Sellers to the bedroom basher killings. In 1996, Gerald Parker was identified and convicted of those crimes. In 1999, Robert Sellers died in prison.
I do feel there was justice, especially when I found out that he died after he had been in prison. That was justice right there. When I remember Savannah, I think of this beautiful young woman, just the prettiest smile. She was very, very poised. I think she would have definitely had a bright future had her life not been taken in any sense of the manner, whether she had married and had a family or gone on in the business world. She just was a very lovely person.
A kind-hearted young woman, beloved by friends and family.
Samantha always had a smile on her face. She loved people, and people loved her, and she loved her cats.
Found bludgeoned and strangled in her own home.
I noticed the cable wrapped around her neck 3 or 4 times.
Military people use that knot fairly often. It was a square knot.
Police explore whether her search for love took a deadly turn.
He wanted to come over and see her, told her to be blindfolded, topless.
She told me he parked in her driveway and just sat there.
He fit that mode of being a stalker.
Until a shocking discovery.
We found that he was more than just a friend, that in fact he had been a lover.
Reveals a killer no one saw coming.
He was a very unlikely killer. He didn't fit the profile at all.
I was in shock.
Frankly, I'd never seen anything quite like this before.
Wichita Falls, Texas, a former oil boom town that grew into a small city.
Wichita Falls is a town of about 100,000 people, about 130 miles west of Dallas.
It's quiet community. We're very close-knit community.
It does have a small town feel to it. It's not difficult to get to know just about everybody in town.
But the town's sense of security is shattered on the morning of January 6, 2003, when police get a call from a woman who says she's just discovered her friend's lifeless body in the bedroom of her home.
I was a rookie police officer, and we got this call that somebody found a body. And we rushed over to the scene. When he arrived, I remember seeing her friends, and they were very upset.
The frantic couple tell the officer the deceased woman is 28-year-old Samantha Lazark.
At this time, I still don't know what exactly was going on.
I arrived 30 seconds to a minute after the first officer arrived. So when he entered the residence, I was right behind him.
So we weapons draw, and we're clearing through the bottom of the house, the kitchen. We start going up the stairs, and we got down the hallway to her bedroom, and that's when I realized we have a murder.
The victim was kind of in a prone position. I noticed the pool of blood was around her head, and I noticed the cable wrapped around her neck 3 or 4 times.
I'd never seen a female that was murdered like this. This was my first time to actually see that, and that gets to you.
We proceeded to establish a crime scene.
A few minutes later, detectives and forensics arrive.
The victim had a ligature made of coaxial cable tied very tight around her throat. It was a square knot. There's a couple of places you learn knots like that. Military people probably use that knot fairly often. And so it told me that whoever killed Samantha was versed in the knot based on some training.
The cable was not the only weapon used by the killer.
There was a fire extinguisher a few feet away from her that had hair and blood on it. There was definitely blood at the back of her head, a lot of it.
There were some handprint, ridge detail on the fire extinguisher that appeared to be in blood. It looked like there was some fingerprint detail even on the coax. A strangulation death has some up close and personal aspect to it. Based on what we saw, we thought there was a good chance the killer actually knew the victim.
Detectives examined the rest of the room for any other clues.
In the middle of the bed was a laser pointer.
On top of the laser pointer was some blood spatter. So we figured that the pointer had to have been on the bed when the injuries occurred to the victim.
And looking around the house in general, none of the windows were broken and all the doors were intact. Whenever you don't have forcible entry, your first thought is that it's someone that she knows.
Police immediately begin the process of interviewing Samantha's neighbors.
One of the neighbors had written down that a car with California tags was at Samantha's home on about January the 1st.
The car from California had been seen 5 days prior, but a different neighbor noticed another suspicious vehicle less than 24 hours before Samantha was found dead.
There was a 12-year-old young man who noticed a motorcycle at Samantha's home. He said it was red and black, and so the information about the motorcycle was noted.
Soon, news of the murder reaches Samantha's loved ones.
I just barely got to work when my husband calls and he tells me to come home. And he said that someone had killed Samantha the night before. I went into instant shock. That's just not something you can comprehend. I mean, is this really happening?
I got a phone call from a friend and he told me to turn the news on, and her house was on the news with police tape all around it. I went numb. I fell to the ground. Because, Samantha, why would someone want to hurt her?
Samantha Lazark grew up in the small town of Terrell, Texas, and was the oldest of 3 children.
Samantha had 2 brothers, Joe Jr. and Lance. He was the baby. And Samantha practically raised him when I could work. She was very responsible. She could cook, she could wash clothes, and she loved little kids, and she loved elderly people. She was one of them late bloomers. She didn't really care that much about boys until she met John.
Samantha married her high school sweetheart, John Lazark, at age 20.
John, he went to school to be a refrigerator repairman, and Samantha worked at the grocery store, and her job was real important to her.
I met her when I worked at Albertsons, and Samantha was everyone's favorite cashier. You may be having a bad day, and she just make you happy. She was very high-spirited. She loved her cats. She loved music, and she just loved her tattoos. Everything she had a meaning. She had her fairies on both arms. Then she had one on her chest right here that was for John. It said, "Always in my heart."
A devoted wife, Samantha was blindsided when after 8 years of marriage, John left her for another woman.
She just kept trying to make him happy, and she was so devastated when he left.
Samantha picked herself up, and several months later, she began dating again.
Samantha's confidence definitely changed. I think Samantha was just trying to have fun, get out back into the world, try new things.
Who killed this vibrant and kind young woman, and why? To try to answer these questions, police interviewed the couple who found the body, Lori and Donnie Nieves.
With Lori and Donnie, As they were the last ones in the home before the police arrived, we certainly needed to make sure that there was no information that would tie either one of them to the actual murder.
Detectives start with Lori, who says she and Samantha were co-workers.
Lori described herself as being a good friend of Samantha's, and she said Samantha didn't come to work, which was very unusual. She didn't answer the phone. Donnie had taken Lori to work that morning, and so he came back to get her and take her to Samantha's home to check on her. Lori said they knocked on the door and didn't get an answer, but the door was unlocked, and so they went in and looked around, and they went upstairs and found Samantha deceased.
Investigators speak to Donnie next, and he confirms Lori's statement.
Donnie characterized Samantha as being his wife's friend. He said that he was only there because he gave his wife a ride to go check on Samantha.
Detectives ask the couple if they know anyone who would want to harm Samantha.
Lori pointed her finger at Samantha's estranged husband, John Lazark. Lori said that John was upset with Samantha because she was about to end his health insurance coverage that she'd been paying for, and he had an injury that was going to be very expensive if he didn't have insurance.
Investigators learned that this ongoing conflict had recently escalated.
Lori said Samantha told her in the couple of weeks before the murder. Samantha and John argued about the health insurance, and John told her something to the effect of, "I want to take everything you have away from you." And so that threat certainly raised a red flag for us and made us wonder if John Lazark had anything to do with this murder.
Coming up, police unearth a hidden online world.
Samantha signed up for one of the chat rooms. Her username was MeowMix28.
The information on the chat was pretty sexual in nature.
I warned her plenty of times. Watch who you're giving your address out to.
And hunt a bold killer with sinister motives.
The fact that he couldn't take no for an answer made us want to figure out exactly who he was.
He pressured her to meet in person, and she said, "What if you're a serial killer?"
There's only one person that could put the DNA and the fingerprints on the murder weapon.
Until investigators close in on an unlikely suspect.
He looked like a decent, clean-cut, all-American kid.
One of the most evil human beings.
I was seriously afraid that there would be another victim.
Police are investigating the violent murder of 28-year-old Samantha Lazark. Detectives have learned that Samantha and her estranged husband, John, were in a bitter dispute.
She had threatened to take him off her health insurance policy, and Samantha's friend said you did make a threat at one point.
That made us want to know more about John and the relationship with Samantha.
Investigators learned the marriage had only ended 6 months prior. They asked those close to Samantha about what led to the breakup.
Her best friend was going through a divorce, and Samantha, being the kind-hearted person she was, let her move in.
Samantha noticed that her friend and John seemed to be a lot closer, perhaps, than what she was comfortable with.
Finally, she asked them if they were having an affair, and they said, yeah, they were in love.
I remember how upset she was. I mean, how else could you feel when your husband leaves you for your best friend?
John moved out with his new girlfriend, but remained in Samantha's life.
They were separated, but John would move back in with Samantha. When he kept moving in and out, it was hell because he wouldn't leave her alone.
Samantha finally told John to move out for good so she could get on with her life. But John was still dependent on her health insurance.
John, when he's 18, a car fell on him when he was working underneath it and messed up his back. He was really anxious about the insurance.
Investigators bring John in to the station.
During the interview with John Lazark, he said that he and Samantha had sorted out the insurance and that she was not going to terminate his health care coverage.
John also denies that he threatened Samantha like her friend claimed. But as he talks, detectives notice a suspicious detail.
He had some small injuries to his hands that we wanted to talk to him about. John explained that he cut his hands while moving a table. The night of the murder, John said that he was with his girlfriend and that she, in fact, confirmed his alibi. If I were in love with somebody and they killed somebody else, I may lie for them, but there wasn't anything to contradict what he said. We asked John for fingerprints and a sample of his DNA, and he agreed to do that.
Police have nothing concrete to tie John to the murder. But before they let him go, detectives ask who he thinks might want Samantha dead.
John Lazark told us that his estranged wife was online dating.
John said he told her it was risky. He might run into some dangerous people.
Investigators set out to verify John's claim.
We interviewed Samantha's friend, Lisa, and Lisa told us that she knew that Samantha was in fact online dating.
Samantha told me one day that she signed up for one of the chat rooms. It was so new back then. She just made a username and started meeting guys. Her username was Meowmix28. It was her love of cats, and she was 28 years old.
When she started meeting these guys online, I said, "You don't know these people. You're not letting them come to the house, are you?" And I could tell that she didn't want me to know because she knew it was going to upset me really bad.
The computer forensics lab examined Samantha's conversations with people online, making arrangements to meet people that she'd chatted with online.
Investigators compare the messages with details of Samantha's dating life provided by her friends.
Lisa told us that Samantha was dating a man named Chris, and she'd spoken with Samantha the evening of the murder, in fact, and that Chris was at Samantha's home visiting with her.
I did not know Chris. I'd never met him. I know she really liked him and liked hanging out with him. She said Chris was over at her house that evening when she called me. I had bought her the latest season of Friends that was out on DVD, and she said, "We're gonna watch Friends. I'll call you tomorrow." And that's the last time I talked to her.
Police determined that the call with Lisa around 6 p.m. was the last contact anyone had with Samantha. She was found dead the following morning, just before 10 a.m.
Because Chris was with Samantha shortly before she died, we really wanted to look at to see who Chris was and where he was.
Investigators search for Chris in Samantha's online chats. However, they find her most recent correspondence, only 2 days before the murder, is with a man who goes by the username I Am Elliot.
I Am Elliot said that he had recently lost his wife, and Samantha said, "Well, I've recently lost my husband to my best friend."
I Am Elliot seemed very sympathetic to her in their messages, and she seemed to respond to that.
We weren't sure who I Am Elliot was.
Her conversations with I Am Elliot had seemed pretty innocent, and there was no association with the name Chris, so the investigation moved on from there.
Detectives dig deeper into Samantha's chats, looking for messages with a darker tone.
So the forensic lab was able to retrieve a chat with somebody initialed KS, and the information on the chat was pretty sexual in nature.
This individual pressured her to meet in person almost immediately, and so that raised red flags about him. He wanted to come over and see her, told her to be blindfolded, topless, and ironically she said, "What if you're a serial killer?" But in the end she went along with it.
Detective suspicion only grows when they realize the chat between KS and Samantha is dated January 1st, just 5 days before the murder.
One of the neighborhood watch people had seen a Mercedes with California license plates on it that had been at her house January 1st.
It had all of the signs that we were on the right track with this guy. So we ran the license plate number, and the tag came back to Christoph Slora.
Could Christoph Slora, KS, be the Chris who was with Samantha just hours before she was found dead?
Samantha's best friend said that the night she was killed, she was with somebody named Chris.
So we said, hey, maybe this is the Chris that we're looking for.
3 days after the murder of Samantha Lazark, police have linked her online chat to the owner of a car with California plates seen parked at her house just days before she was killed.
The neighbor had written down the license plate number of Christoph Slora's car.
Police believe that Christoph is the man behind the username KS.
When we looked at the online chat between KS and Samantha, they were obviously involved with each other sexually. And as we were looking for a Chris, we were really interested in finding that person.
Samantha did tell her friend that she was hanging out with a guy named Chris the night of her murder.
Alarm bells ring when they dig deeper into their suspect's background.
Christoph was stationed at Shepherd Air Force Base here in Wichita Falls.
Christoph wound up being somebody that was in the military. There was a perfect square knot in the ligature that killed Samantha, and I've already thought that somebody perhaps with a military background knew that square knot.
While officers are sent to bring Christoph into the PD, detectives receive Samantha's autopsy report.
The cause of death was strangulation, and that the coax was the means.
The report also shows significant blunt force trauma to the back of Samantha's head.
I think it would be really hard to just strangle somebody with a cable, and I suspect that the fire extinguisher was used to incapacitate Samantha so that she couldn't fight back.
There was no evidence found during the autopsy or any other testing that showed there was any kind of sign of a sexual assault.
Forensic analysis of the murder weapons gives investigators hope that the killer will be identified.
From the lab, we learned that the coax had, and that the fire extinguisher also had DNA from who we believed would be the killer.
The evidence that came back from the lab was very powerful. Fingerprints were on both the weapons, so it's pretty clear that if we could find one person that matched all these pieces of evidence, that we had the person that committed this crime, not just beyond a reasonable doubt, but beyond any doubt.
Armed with new insights into the murder, police head to the local Air Force base to look for their #1 suspect.
When we tracked down Chris Slora, we asked him if he would come in for an interview, and he agreed to do that. He admitted that he had had a sexual relationship with Samantha, but they didn't have a whole lot else in common, and he said he hadn't seen her for some time.
Investigators ask him to explain why witnesses saw his car outside Samantha's home on January 1st, just 5 days before she was killed.
At that point, he did not have anything to do with her death or being over there the day of the murder.
Police want to know where Chris was the night Samantha was killed.
Chris Slora said that he spent the day with some friends at a batting cage and offered up the names of his friends. We followed up that information by interviewing his friends, and they assured us, in fact, Chris Slora had been with them during the day and into the evening that day.
Detectives conclude that Chris Slora was not the Chris that Samantha was with when she called her friend at 6 p.m. But they can't rule him out as the perpetrator, since the exact time of her death is unknown.
Even though his alibi was pretty good, it wasn't airtight. And so Chris Slora provided prints and DNA sample for us.
With no hard evidence against Chris Slora, he's free to go. 4 days after her murder, family and friends gather to lay Samantha to rest.
Samantha's funeral, it was packed. It was full of people that loved her. It was beautiful.
She had a really big funeral. It was just hard. Nobody should have to bury their child. And the way she died was so violent, and I couldn't stand the thought of what actually happened to her. I had to take all of her pictures down for a while. I just couldn't deal with it.
The next day, detectives ask Samantha's friends if they know of any other men she may have been involved with, and receive stunning new information.
Lisa raised the name Donnie Nieves as somebody that she thought that had an affair with Samantha.
Lori and Donnie Nieves were the last ones in the home before the police arrived. They found Samantha deceased. I was surprised because when we interviewed Donnie at the time, Donnie characterized his relationship with Samantha as being his wife's friend. But after the funeral, Samantha's friend Lisa said that Donnie was more than just a friend, that in fact he had been a lover.
Lori was a good friend of Samantha's and also a co-worker, but Samantha told me that Donnie and her had a short, intimate relationship shortly before she was killed. Samantha definitely felt guilty about it.
Once we realized that he had been a lover of Samantha's, we had to look at him more closely. He had not been forthcoming before about this affair, so it makes you suspicious that this person has something to hide, and maybe what they have to hide is they're involved in the crime. That is a red flag.
It's been 1 week since 28-year-old Samantha Lazark was found bludgeoned and strangled to death in her home. Now, investigators have learned that Samantha had an affair with the man who discovered her body.
When Donnie Nieves was first interviewed, he failed to mention that he had been intimate with Samantha. When we interviewed Donnie again and confronted him with the question, were you lovers with the victim, he admitted that he was, and that it had been a very brief, intense relationship.
Detectives asked Donnie why he didn't tell them about the relationship before.
He said he didn't want his wife to find out about this affair because he knew she wouldn't be happy about it.
Had Donnie killed Samantha to keep her from telling his wife Lori about their affair?
We kept digging into him to see if there's anything that would connect him to the murder.
Donnie insists he did not kill Samantha and begs investigators not to tell his wife about his infidelity.
We asked him if he'd give DNA and fingerprints, and he cooperated.
Police let Donnie go, and while they wait for his DNA and fingerprint results, investigators uncover another suspicious exchange with an online suitor in Samantha's chat room history.
His username was Death Metal. Samantha formed a relationship with Death Metal based on their mutual enjoyment of that kind of music.
The messages suggest the pair had been on several dates, but then something changed.
From the correspondence, he thought it was a pretty good relationship. And then all of a sudden, without warning, she told him she wanted to break it off.
The relationship may have been over, but the man continued to send Samantha messages.
The fact that Death Metal couldn't take no for an answer certainly made us want to look at him pretty close and figure out exactly who he was and interview him.
Had the man been so enraged by the rejection that he murdered Samantha? Police asked Samantha's friend Lisa if she can help identify Death Metal.
Samantha's friend Lisa said it was a guy by the name of Connor Days.
Connor was the one that really got to her, made her nervous. I warned her plenty of times, like meeting people online, you know, watch your back, watch who you're giving your address out to, your phone number. And he was the only one that really stands out in my mind that he scared her.
He just wouldn't stay away. He left notes on her door, even though Samantha told Connor that she didn't want to have anything to do with him any longer. And that kind of freaked her out a little bit.
Samantha told me one day he parked in her driveway and just sat there, and she'd call me and she wouldn't know what to do.
Connor would fit that mode of being a stalker, coming around a lady's house all times of the day or night. And that stalker profile is the one that can lead to someone being a murderer. Connor looked really good for this, only he wasn't a Chris. But Samantha had dated him shortly before the murder, and we certainly knew that we had to find him.
Investigators track down Connor and bring him in for questioning.
When we interviewed Connor Days, he was pretty nonchalant about the whole thing. He didn't seem to have a lot of interest in the fact that she was dead. And that was either I absolutely didn't do this, or I'm trying to throw you off, and we weren't sure which one it was.
Police asked Connor why he wouldn't leave Samantha alone after she broke off the relationship.
Connor admitted he kept coming back around even though she didn't want to see him any longer. And it wasn't until she pressed the issue that he actually left her alone. And so when asked for his whereabouts at the time of the murder, Connor said that he was home alone and he didn't have anyone else to substantiate that claim, and that's a problem. Connor was asked during the interview to provide a sample of his DNA and prints for us.
With no hard evidence linking Connor to the murder, he is released. 3 weeks have passed since Samantha was found dead, and investigators still haven't found the elusive Chris that was with Samantha the evening she was killed.
There had been an awful lot of work done, and we still hadn't solved the case. There was kind of a frustrated feeling that the person hadn't been caught yet.
As they await news of an arrest, those closest to Samantha struggle with the pain of losing her.
The mental images, imagining her maybe crying out for her mom or her dad or even me, somebody to come help her. It just makes me sick knowing someone could do that. Like one of the most evil human beings.
I couldn't grasp the thought that my daughter was gone and she wasn't coming back.
1 month into the investigation, police are running out of leads. But then they receive the forensic results they hope will blow the case wide open.
When you get information about whose prints and whose DNA is on that coaxial cord that was around the throat, that's just the place where you work to be. There's only one person that could put the DNA and the fingerprints on the murder weapon, and that was the killer.
It's been 1 month since Samantha Lazark was killed, and detectives have just received lab results from evidence found on the murder weapons.
We had all these suspects and were able to obtain possession of DNA samples and fingerprints.
Will the results match John Lazark, Samantha's estranged husband, Donnie Nieves, who had an affair with Samantha and also found her body? Or one of her online suitors, Connor Days or Christoph Slora?
It did seem like we were on the brink of solving the case, but the results came back and it did exonerate all these people.
Investigators are stunned. The DNA and fingerprints don't belong to any of their suspects or even anyone in the police database.
We were hoping for the match, and it's a little disheartening when you think maybe you've got something and then it turns out not to be at all.
I talked to the DA and the lead detective, but I didn't know what to do. I was in shock.
It did concern me that Samantha was never gonna get the justice that she deserved.
With the investigation back to square one, police review all the evidence and statements they've collected so far in their hunt for Samantha's killer.
While we were looking back through the notes, we remembered that there was a youngster in the neighborhood that said something about a motorcycle having been around the night that Samantha died. So we asked the computer forensics people to look for the keyword motorcycle, and they came back with information that, in fact, I.M. Elliott said that he had a motorcycle.
When detectives previously looked at chats between Samantha and I.M. Elliott, they didn't find any red flags in the correspondence or any indication his name was Chris, so they moved on to other leads.
Our conversations with I.M. Elliott had seemed pretty innocent, and during the correspondence, he told her he worked out at Metro Photo.
Metro Photo was a camera shop in Wichita Falls.
Investigators rushed to the store, hoping to locate their new suspect.
The 12-year-old said the motorcycle is red and black. And we went by the camera shop, and there was a red and black Harley-Davidson motorcycle. It was an aha moment, if you will.
We ran the plates on the motorcycle. We found out it did belong to a person named Christopher Kyle Russell.
The tag came back to Chris Russell, and We said, Chris, aha. It made it even a bigger aha moment for us. And that's when we decided it was time to know more about Chris. And Chris Russell was enrolled at Midwestern State University here in Wichita Falls, taking some criminal justice classes. He looked like he came from a good home, and he was a decent, clean-cut, all-American kid.
His family was well-to-do, respected members of a large church here in town. His profile was almost too good to be true.
Our first interview with Chris was a trip to Metro Photo, where we went in and asked him to come with us, and he did.
At the station, investigators begin by asking the 21-year-old if he was with Samantha on the night of her murder.
He was polite, but he declined to give an interview. He was asked to give his DNA samples and fingerprints, and he said he needed to talk to a lawyer before he did anything.
Even though it's Chris's right to tell us no, maybe it's because he had something he didn't want us to know. So we served Chris a search warrant in order to obtain prints and DNA from him.
As detectives wait for results, they continue to look into Chris Russell's past and discover he served in the armed forces.
Chris had in fact been in the Marine Corps, but only for a matter of days. They sent him packing after they got a good look at him. That was a large red flag that the Marine Corps didn't want him.
With Chris looking increasingly suspicious, what detectives discover next is chilling.
In the chat between Chris and Samantha, he said that he had recently lost his wife, and we looked into this and found some, frankly, rather terrifying information.
Investigators learn that Chris lived in the small town of Chadron, Nebraska with his wife Tara, who died only 10 weeks before Samantha's murder.
It was a short time after she had passed away. One night he packed up his belongings and moved back to Wichita Falls from Chadron.
Police contact law enforcement in Nebraska for information about the death of their suspect's wife.
Chris Russell's wife died under circumstances that at first was ruled pneumonia. However, when the autopsy came back and there was noted some bruising on the neck, that tells me that probably wasn't pneumonia. That sounds to me like a strangulation.
But by the time the autopsy information was released, Chris had already had his wife cremated and left the state.
I think the original autopsy didn't go into enough detail for authorities to charge Chris with that murder, and now that she had been cremated, that was never going to happen.
Police fear they have an emerging serial killer on their hands. Detectives obtain a search warrant for Chris's residence.
Chris lived with his parents here in Wichita Falls. While we were executing the search warrant, we noticed in Chris's bedroom a photograph that we thought was Samantha, but that was his deceased wife, Tara. Chris Russell's wife died, and weeks later, Samantha's now dead, and she looks incredibly like Chris Russell's wife.
Police uncover more disturbing clues in Chris Russell's bedroom.
We found a book, and it was a book about knots. And had I not known that there was a square knot around Samantha's neck, I probably wouldn't have looked twice at that book. And we also found some laser pointers.
The laser pointers found in Chris's bedroom were nearly identical to the one found at the crime scene.
There wasn't actually a smoking gun found during that search warrant, but there were certainly bullets to load that gun with.
Investigators seize Chris's computer and confirm that he's the man behind the username I Am Elliot. But as they start reviewing his chat logs, police discover another troubling detail.
We found that Chris, not only was he seeing Samantha, but he was seeing another young lady in Wichita Falls as well.
Fearing that their killer could strike again, police rush to track the woman down.
I was terrified about her. I was seriously afraid that she would be another victim in what looked like a continuing pattern from Chris Russell.
Police investigating the murder of Samantha Lazark have learned that their prime suspect's wife died under suspicious circumstances and believe that his new girlfriend is in grave danger.
I was worried he would do something else again. This nice young lady has no idea what she's involved with. We were certainly worried that she might be another victim in this case.
Detectives locate the woman and inform her that Chris is under investigation.
She was surprised to find that Chris perhaps was involved with a murder here in Wichita Falls. When we interviewed her, she said that Chris had brought her a DVD of Friends to her home and that it was opened when she got it.
Investigators believe it's the same DVD Chris had watched with Samantha on the night of her murder.
Samantha told her friend Lisa that she and Chris had watched that DVD of Friends at her home. But when we searched the crime scene at Samantha's house, the Friends DVD was not there.
With the evidence against Chris growing, police receive his DNA and fingerprint results.
In the end, there was only one person with DNA and fingerprints on the murder weapon, and that would be who killed Samantha, and that was Chris Russell. We arrested him at work. As I recall, he didn't seem surprised we were there at all. In fact, he didn't have anything to say about it.
At trial, prosecutors put forward their theory about how the murder unfolded.
The day of the murder, they were having a nice Sunday afternoon together and went out to her house, and her friend Lisa talked to her on the phone and things were still going good when he was there, evidently.
Maybe Chris brought her a laser pointer so that she could play with her cats. Then something happened that caused him to be angry.
The first thing was a surprise attack from behind because the bruises were all on the back of her head. He knocked her to the floor. At that point, the coaxial cable was in connection with the television set, and he had evidently ripped it out, which indicated a person who was very angry. And she's desperately trying to fight him off. At the same time, he starts looping that coaxial cable around her throat once, twice, and then a third time. And then he ties the knot there, and all the time she's getting weaker as blood is flowing out of her body. Then he strangles the life out of her.
With no confession from Chris, no one knows his motive for murdering Samantha.
You'd always like to know exactly what happened at the Lazark home that night, but something caused him to decide that he was going to kill her that night.
The jury finds Chris Russell guilty, and the judge gives him the maximum sentence of 99 years in prison.
There was an overwhelming sense of relief that we had taken somebody from society and put them someplace where they weren't going to harm anybody. And that's that big, deep sigh you get when you know in your heart that you did a good job. When you look at Chris Russell at first glance, you see a nice, clean-cut young man who was going to college to better himself and who was a regular churchgoer.
He was a very unlikely killer. He didn't fit the profile at all. I guess what we should take away from a case like this is that we need to take caution when we meet people online. You can't be too careful.
An investigation is later opened into the death of Chris Russell's wife, but no charges have been laid. For Samantha's family and friends, the pain of losing her will never go away.
I want my daughter back, which I know it's, not ever gonna happen. And she was special. She really was. She loved everybody. And she loved her mama the best. But I don't know what to say. I don't know. We can't get her back.
That day, Chris took my best friend, an amazing person, a person that can never be replaced in your life. I know she's watching down on me. I know she tries to protect me, and Samantha inspired me to definitely not take things for granted and to just live each day, make it the best I can. She's just made me a better person.
When police investigators arrived, they found a very violent and brutal attack.
The body of schoolboy Breck Bednar lies in an Essex flat.
Breck is a young gamer. He's only 14 years old. He was on his back with his arms underneath him. It's a very unusual position. He was still bound by duct tape behind his back. It was unique for myself and for Essex Police, really, because of the nature of the way it was carried out.
This didn't look to be a simple case of murder. He'd had his throat cut, and it was clear that Breck died in a very awful way.
I tried for years to have Breck when I decided I wanted to have a family. And it did take quite a long time. So when he came, I was over the moon.
Breck Bednar was born in London to US citizen Lauren Lefebvre and her then husband Barry.
I say he was my first love and my most important love. And I've said this before, and it's not nice to my husband, but you know, men can come and go, but your firstborn turns you into someone you've never been. They make you a parent. And I loved being a mother.
Lauren, who is a teaching assistant, notices that Breck has a natural ability with anything technical.
He was a clever boy, and as he grew, you could tell that he loved playing and doing with anything that he could build or make or fix. From a young age, he would, if there was a remote control, I'd find him taking it apart, putting it back together, a radio, any sort of gadget. In fact, we sometimes called him Brecky Gadget, because he just would have everything, studying how it worked and how it was put together.
He was smart, he was funny, he was caring, but he was also a typical older brother. He was embarrassed of me at school. He never liked to admit that I was his sister, and I would wave at him and he would be embarrassed, but he was always there for me if I needed.
Right from when he was 8 to 10 years old, he could use a computer much better than I could, and I just lost ground after that and never caught up. But he just had that knack.
I remember Breck playing tons of games online, and me and my siblings were just fascinated by whatever he was playing because he was always the best. He would always win. I just preferred watching. We didn't see any danger to it because we were just so impressed by how well he was playing and how much it made him happy that he was playing and that he had an audience.
His passion was anything to do with computing, and those were the kind of friends that he made within school. And they invited him into a gaming group. And for me, it felt safe because I knew those boys and I knew their families. I knew where they lived. For him, it would have felt comfortable because he had known them since he was young. And that's when he started spending more time gaming online.
Breck has a particular passion for a game called Battlefield 4, and he's playing it obsessively with his friends.
At the beginning, I was happy that Breck was enjoying his friends from school. Because of the divorce, he had to switch schools a couple of times. And I think that's a really hard thing for a kid to do. And I was glad that he was having fun. I could sort of relate to why he was enjoying, the excitement of the games they were playing together.
I remember the first time I heard Danes' name, and I was just like, oh, Breck's got a friend, and I was all excited. I mean, he had plenty of friends at school, but it wasn't a school friend. It was like a new online friend, which seemed fun because it was somebody not from school. It was maybe somebody from a different area, which could have been exciting.
Breck and his friends play on a server, a private group within the online game they played. It was run by a teenager called Lewis Danes, who is just 4 years older than Breck.
I remember the day, the door was open, he was having a good time, but I heard a different voice than I had heard before, and it was deeper, it was more in charge, it was more in control. When I asked Breck about this new person who I didn't recognize, Breck wasn't worried at all. He said the other boys have been gaming with him for years.
Daines impresses the younger schoolboys with stories about his life.
Lewis Daines told the online gamers who formed part of the server that he ran that he was a successful software engineer who was living a high life. He told people that he fleeted between New York, in Syria, and also that he was working with the US government, and that he was working for Microsoft as well. So he very much portrayed himself as somebody who was a high flyer in the gaming world.
Daines tells the boys he left school early to pursue his dreams.
He's saying that, you know, you don't need to go to uni, you don't need education, look how successful I am, and I made my own way, I create my own success.
Some of the boys soon begin to look up to him as their leader.
I think Daines was, by all accounts, very charismatic. He was articulate, he was funny, he was friendly, which of course would make the online gamers want to interact with him and ask for his advice.
When I would go into Breck's room, the door was open. He had 3 screens, and on one screen was the names of all the gamers, and then the action was in the middle, and then there were pictures of some of the gamers' live feeds. And the thing was, Daines never had his face showing. And so I would say to Breck, well, why isn't he showing his face? And Breck's like, oh, because he does some important work, so he keeps private. I tried to Google him. I couldn't find any photos. I found it unusual that the boys were showing their face, but the person we didn't know was keeping his identity hidden. This person who we didn't know would chat with me, and he'd say, hey, Mom, how are you? And I'd say, oh, good, yeah, it's sunny here. What's it like in New York City? And he'd say, oh, it's a bit cold. No, oh, what have you been doing? Oh, I can't really go out much. I'm working all the time, really, really busy. And I'm just thinking, come on, you're 17 years old. You're living in New York City, supposedly, and you don't have anything to say, like not a show, not a gig. And he never seemed like he was on New York time zone. So I had huge doubts that he was actually in the States, and I always felt like he could have been, 2 streets over. There was only one time that any of the boys saw what Daines looked like, and it was when Breck and one of his friends met Daines on a live stream in a very darkened room, and Daines barely let them see his identity. But they saw it enough to be able to tell that he was actually a teenager like them. And I think that was really a pivotal point, because at that point they thought, Breck's mom is so paranoid. He's not a creepy old guy. He is a teenager like us. And I think they let their guard down then. At the beginning, all of the guys were looking up to Daines and thinking he was amazing.
14-year-old Breck Bednar's mum is concerned about a mysterious gamer called Lewis Daines, who has invited her son to join his gaming server. Records of the group's online conversations show talk was often steered towards the topic of sex.
Lewis was pushing the boundaries, so there would be a lot of dick talk. There would be a lot of talk about calling each other homos, that sort of thing. When you're online, there aren't the normal socializing controls. You could say what you want, when you want, how you want, because there aren't the same sort of consequences. So therefore, things escalate very quickly.
The first time I kind of noticed that something was wrong or something was off was when my mum, my dad and I had gone to pick up Breck from Air Cadets. And we were driving home, it was dark, and I was just in the back. And they were yelling at Breck because I think he wanted to quit Air Cadets or something. Everyone was yelling, saying that Breck was spending way too much time on the computer and spending too much time gaming. And I really took no notice. It just seemed like a typical teenage thing where I understood that parents might not want their children on games 24/7, but I never could have imagined it was something more sinister.
One of the things that Danes did was try to turn the boys against parents with all their rules, So when Breck had joined Air Cadets because he wanted to be a pilot, and he loved it at the beginning, Danes started sort of making fun of anything that was establishment, anything that was organized, anything that you had to wear a uniform, that you had to show up at a certain time.
It's no secret that a lot of teenage children want to disassociate themselves from their parents. They're joining maturity, they're going through puberty, they want some autonomy. So it's a very natural thing for a teenager to want to rebel. But what's unusual about this case is the way that it escalated.
Danes started then to sort of turn Breck against everything, including religion and government and politics. It was like he was anti-everything.
Disturbed at the influence Louis Danes is developing over her son, Lauren attempts to confront him directly.
I wanted to see him face to face, like Breck did with his other friends. I wanted to have a face-to-face chat in his room. And I had offered to meet up in person as well in a public place. But Breck said, no, he doesn't want to meet you. He doesn't like parents and he thinks you're too judgmental.
I remember my parents saying, why doesn't he want to meet in person if he's legit? Or why doesn't he want to meet the family?
I kept saying to Breck, I want to talk to him. And finally Breck said, okay, he's agreed to chat with you, but on Messenger. We live messaged back and forth. And I remember saying, why are you trying to turn Breck against religion? Why are you trying to turn Breck against school? Why are you trying to pull him away from family activities? And he just would say, well, Breck's a good boy. Why are you forcing him to do things that he doesn't want to do? Why are you forcing him to do things that make him unhappy? Breck's clever. Breck's so smart. He was like telling me about my own son. I got angry because it wasn't getting anywhere. He wasn't answering why he was trying to change Breck. He just kept telling me how great Breck was.
Lauren suspects that Danes is planning for Breck and the other boys to take part in a covert operation.
I sort of thought maybe he was grooming the boys for some sort of terrorist activity.
He would say that he was running Syrian refugees through a pipeline into other countries. He would portray himself as somebody who was part of the intelligence community. And a lot of the content that he was sharing was to do with terrorism and, quite nasty footage.
And I thought he was going to get them to do some mass hack on school or government computers, and they'd take the fall and he would get away with it. Maybe he'd put them on a big mission with real guns and get them to do something horrible. That went through my head. I sensed something was wrong. I just didn't know how to fix it. I was scared when I phoned the police because I wasn't sure. In my heart, I felt sure, but I didn't have proof. And I phoned the police and I literally said, I need to speak to the department that deals with grooming.
In desperation, Lauren contacts Surrey Police, but they struggle to understand her concerns.
I feel my son and his friends are being groomed by this guy who runs the server. And they said to me, what's a server? And I went, I don't know, it's where they get together and game. So it was like almost the blind leading the blind in this conversation.
Okay, and what sort of concerns do you have then? I mean, obviously there's that age difference, but what if he's...
He's trying to turn him against everything. He's grooming him for something because he's trying to change his thinking set on everything.
I think for grooming, the offence back then was that you had to arrange to meet on 2 separate occasions for it to be grooming. And of course, this just doesn't meet the criteria. It's just a 14-year-old gaming online with an 18-year-old.
It scares me, I don't know if he's trying to groom them to become part of his group.
Yeah. Well, we'll do some research on this end, and you've got the reference number there if you do find anything, like his contact number or anything.
Basically, I was told 3 times that intelligence would be checked, that they would look into it.
But the police decided not to take the case any further, and it later emerged that Dane's name was not even checked on the police national computer database.
Surrey Police, this, for them, it was maybe an 18-year-old undermining a mum's position with a 14-year-old.
That was then when I organized a meeting with other parents, and we sat the boys down 2 days later and literally said, look, we're worried.
Lauren and her ex-husband Barry outline a plan of action.
They decide that an intervention is in fact needed to physically tear Breck away from the relationship with Danes. So Breck was told that he can no longer go online. His computer was going to be taken away from him.
And so I even, said, I think you're being groomed. And Breck said, well, that's a harsh term to say grooming.
Breck and his friends idealise Lewis. Breck is young, he's only 14, perhaps a little bit childish, perhaps naive, but also Lewis, I think, is very cunning, deceitful, and very manipulative.
Unbeknown to Lauren and the other parents, Lewis Danes is spying on their meeting.
Danes had asked Breck to record that meeting, and he had a little MP3 player in his pocket, so he was able to get that meeting recorded.
It's going to sound weird, but there's no one else who sort of I share interest with. Not in real life, in gaming. There's not that connection where you have sort of mutual interest.
It could be just one way to assert his dominance and control over Breck to show who's in charge. It could be to set up this dynamic of them being very much in it together, so Lewis is saying to Breck, it's me and you versus your mother who's making life difficult for us.
Danes kept the recording and even made a version where he added his own commentary.
It's quite chilling, really, because you've got the two of them arguing in the background and Lauren arguing with Breck, and he's just in this monotonous voice. This is Lauren, the mother of Breck. Look at her and the way she's trying to control. He's just weird. It's very strange.
With the recording in his possession, Danes has the upper hand.
At that point, Danes knew what we thought of him. He knew we were onto him, we didn't like him, we didn't trust him, we didn't believe him, and it became more dangerous because everything went underground. After we forbade the boys from gaming or speaking or socializing to Danes, Breck went back to acting like his happy-go-lucky self.
After hearing the outcome of the meeting, Danes secretly sends Breck a mobile phone so he can continue to communicate with him in private.
I thought everything was better. We didn't talk about, Danes anymore because I thought he was out of the picture.
The family spent Christmas together, and then into the new year, Breck went away on his trip to Spain. And sadly, that was the last time that Lauren saw Breck alive.
And I remember our last little meal together was Taco Bell, because that was my favorite naughty treat. And he ate just so, he was just such a good eater, because he would just enjoy it, and he could just put it away even though he was tall and thin. And I just remember enjoying that time with him because it was just us. It was a special time. And so I'm at least happy to know that he did have good times with me. And he would have known somewhere deep inside of him that I wasn't the bad guy.
Lauren hopes the school trip to Seville in Spain will mark a fresh start for Breck.
We hugged and kissed and said goodbye, and I just remember feeling so proud. And as he walked away, I thought how handsome he was.
When he was with the school party, he posted online him sitting next to a girl. Lewis Danes didn't like this. Lewis was berating him for putting a picture up online of him with a girl, and why would you leave yourself open to other people making comment about you and this sort of thing on Facebook? So Lewis obviously didn't like the fact that Breck was socialising with other people.
Lauren goes abroad on holiday herself, satisfied Danes no longer has a hold over Breck.
He texted me when he was away on the trip, and he just said, "Oh, it's amazing here, Mom. The food and the people, we're having such a good time." And I was so pleased because I thought, this is exactly what I want for my kids. Life experiences outside of their bedroom and the computer, you know. And I honestly, I thought everything was on track. I really did. I hate to admit how wrong I was.
Breck returns from Spain and he goes to stay with his dad. And the next day, he tells his dad that he is now going off to stay the night with his friend.
Breck doesn't reveal that the friend is Lewis Daines, who has ordered a cab to take Breck and his computer equipment on a 31-mile journey to his flat in Grays, Essex.
Now, this is moving quite quickly into a real-world interaction between Breck and the man who has been grooming him.
And he has this idealized, almost fictional version of what he thinks the attacker's going to be like. It's somebody that he respects, somebody that he admires, and he turns up to the house and he suddenly realizes that this is some sort of trap.
Essex Police Emergency.
Hi there. Okay. Hello. I need police and a forensics team to my address, please.
What do you mean? What's happened?
My friend and I got into an altercation, and I'm the only one who came out alive.
Are you telling me you've killed somebody?
Yes, I am.
Right, and who am I speaking to?
My name is Lewis Daines. I'm 18 years old.
Right, okay. And what's actually happened?
My friend came to stay the night with me yesterday, feeling very down, feeling suicidal.
One of the features is this kind of inappropriate politeness. You know, the way that he's initially really polite to the dispatch person. He's not really behaving like somebody who has just killed somebody.
And I woke up this morning, he was in a mess. I tried to calm him down. I hugged him, then said that I was there for him. He shrugged me off.
You'd expect the caller to be much more emotional. They would want to get help there and then, now.
You're telling me he is definitely dead?
Yes, I'm telling you he's definitely dead.
It just seems very methodical and thought through. He's talking as though he's rehearsed this call in his mind.
Okay, but why did he come to stay with you?
Because he was fed up with his home life.
Right, because he was fed up with his home life.
Look, he's had a lot of problems. I've known him for a long time.
He goes into a lot of detail, and I can only assume that he's thought about this and he knows that he's going to rely on this as his defence.
He claims that Breck is incredibly unhappy on the home front, you know, wanting to commit self-harm, suicide.
What's happened this morning?
I woke up. He was just standing up. He was in a mess. Hands on his face. I got up, I put my arms around him, and I said it was okay. He just shrugged me off and said no. I can't remember exactly what he said. He was going on about how he didn't want to go home. He was fed up with his life, and he didn't want to go. In my room, adjacent to my bed, I have a chest of drawers. I had a penknife on there, folded. He picked it up, opened it, and then lost control.
Slow down, let me just take those details here. Penknife on the bedside table, Breck grabbed this,
yes.
What, in order to harm himself?
No, in order to harm me. He opened it and then lost control.
Lewis Daines is basically saying Breck came at him with a knife, and so Daines, in his mind, had to just resort to self-defence and ended up committing murder.
I, in self-defence, put my left arm up to block him from stabbing me effectively. We struggled. I got him to the ground. He got up. I grabbed the knife and I stabbed him once in the back of the neck, I believe somewhere near the brainstem. He turned around, tried to carry it on. I don't remember exactly what happened, but the fight ended with me cutting his throat. I believe I turned around and I slashed his throat.
Oh, it's just shocking. Incredibly difficult to listen to. People are harmed and killed in acts of self-defense. I mean, that does happen. I suspect that he does feel that by himself calling the police demonstrates the level of confidence he has that he may well get away with this.
My first reaction walking into that flat was how tidy it was. It was clean, it was tidy. There was no indication that anything untoward had taken place in that flat.
Lewis Daines is arrested at his home. Shortly after, Essex Police's digital forensics officer Clifton Pell searches the property.
I was shown around the lounge, I was shown around the kitchen, and there was the bedroom. And I opened the door and Breck was still lying there, covered in blood and with his throat cut. And when I looked across the bed, there was just blood all over the bed, and there was blood on the laptop as well. So yeah, you take a deep breath and you feel really sad and really sorry for a life that's been taken.
I have a very clear sequence of events that day. It's just completely stuck in my mind. So I walked home from the park and I see these 2 police cars outside my house, which I thought initially was strange, and all of a sudden these 2 lady police officers, they came up to me. The police told me that I had to call my dad and tell him to come home, which is what I did. I called my dad, he was working, and I said that the police were at the house and they're saying that you need to come home. And he came in and all of a sudden there was just screaming and yelling and shouting, and we were so confused. We had no idea what was going on.
Chloe discovers that in the moments after the killing, Daines delivers a final message to the gamers on his server.
Daines had sent images of Breck's body to Breck's friends, and in turn Breck's friends communicated and messaged Breck's siblings to more or less say, if this is what's happened to Breck, we're really sorry for your loss.
I just remember being in my room just crying and screaming, and I was just suffering alone basically. Just having to read this about my brother is just so hard to think about.
I'd only been in Spain a couple of days, and I woke up with an impending sense of doom. And I didn't know why, and I ran through my head, why do I feel this weird, heavy feeling?
Shortly after breakfast, Lorin's phone rang.
I got, this is the worst call any parent could ever get. And it was Dad that said, I don't know how to tell you this, but Daines has killed Breck. And my life ended, really. I could have died right then and there. I couldn't stop screaming. I just couldn't believe it. And I fell to the ground and screamed until they brought in a doctor to give me something to calm me down. And it's just so hard to have something so horrible that you just can't take back and you can't fix. There's no fixing it.
For a digital forensics analyst, the challenging thing is to make sure you don't lose evidence.
And Pell faces an immediate problem. Daines had taken care to cover his tracks.
In the bathroom, the sink was full of water, but there were 3 mobile phones in there, and there was 2 hard drives and also an electrical board in there. So the implication was that Lewis Daines had tried to corrupt or do something with the electronics that were actually in that sink.
Pell and his team race to recover the data that Daines has attempted to destroy, while other officers look into the killer's background.
It quickly became apparent that Lewis Daines wasn't the high-flying computer engineer that he was claiming to be.
They find he lived with his grandparents after his mother moved abroad with a new partner.
And there are reports that he was in and out of different local authority care homes. At the time of grooming Breck, Daines was unemployed, essentially living in his grandparents' flat, and was in receipt of several welfare benefits.
Daines is taken into custody and interrogated by officers.
He tried to blame Breck and said that Breck was upset because his parents, particularly me, was so horrible. And he went to Daines to be consoled, and then he got upset. I think maybe Daines tried to kiss him, and then he got upset, and so he pulled out a knife. It was him trying to say that it was self-defense, and Breck, tried to hurt him.
He just wants to create this fantasy in his mind, claiming that it was self-defense when he really killed him in cold blood.
Breck was tied up with duct tape. It was just one of his, sort of web of lies.
For ourselves as digital forensics officers, we are responsible for the recovery of data from digital devices and for the processing of that data and then making that available for review to investigators.
Pell and his team need to find a way to recover texts from the waterlogged phones found in Daines' sink.
They did have to be dried out. It's not the moisture causes problems, it's when a device dries out and you have like electrolytes, little conductive elements that then mess with the electronics. We made sure that those devices were dried properly. We got data off the 2 phones. There's another one that wasn't actually working.
The data on the phones offers a string of vital clues.
Daines sent a message to Breck saying, when you come over, you need to tell your dad that you're somewhere else. So Lewis Daines prepped Breck with an answer that he was going to be going to a friend, and he wasn't to tell his dad that he was staying over at his friend's until the night, so that will then give him a chance to then get over to Lewis's and then to be able to keep the deception going.
More recovered texts reveal Daines lied to Breck that he was seriously ill and wanted him to take over his software company. He asked Breck to meet him in person at his home to finalize the details. Pell's team recover other files from Daines' laptop showing this offer was merely bait.
When I look at the sort of date that we had, Lewis did plan this attack. He ordered online condoms and duct tape in the same order. That was at the beginning of 2014.
And these were discovered to have been used during the murder. Premeditation is a distinctive type of murder. It shows that the perpetrator has thought through the act that they're about to commit. It shows that they've committed to carrying out that particular violent crime.
Bodily fluids found at the scene suggest the crime was a depraved sexual act.
And I think for the blood, the saliva, the DNA, all those things point to the fact that it was a sexually motivated murder.
And as investigators explore Daines' school days, they make another grim discovery.
It came to light that as a 15-year-old boy, Daines had been accused of raping another boy. Now, this particular allegation didn't go anywhere. It didn't lead to any convictions at all.
When Lauren had contacted Surrey Police 3 months earlier, they had promised to investigate Daines' background. It turned out they had not even run a search on his name.
I think I was pretty angry to think that Daines sexually assaulted another boy because he wasn't punished. I don't think anything happened to him.
An independent police complaints commission report finds that a police national computer check should have been made into Daines's background after Lauren's call, but no checks were carried out. Surrey police admit mistakes were made and pay Breck's family compensation in 2016.
From a mother's perspective, that aspect must be incredibly difficult to reconcile. There were warning signs there, there were red flags there. Breck's mother was shouting her suspicions from the rooftops, and ultimately it fell on deaf ears and serves now as a very stark reminder of the real dangers of online predators.
Daines is charged with murder, but despite the damning dossier of evidence, he continues to insist his actions were justified.
I was furious. The fact that he was claiming self-defense and saying that my brother was down and depressed was just crazy to me. I was horrified to think that people might believe his story.
I was nervous. I hadn't ever been to court for anything. And the first day, the jurors all came in and were chosen, and the pleas were read out, and Daines said not guilty to everything. And yeah, we didn't know what to expect.
There are a number of factors why somebody like Daines would grow up to be who he was and to do what he did. Certain traumas in childhood can, go into kind of fracturing somebody's identity and personality to an extent that they can themselves carry out harmful acts against other people.
And even from behind bars, Lauren believes Daines's threat to her family hasn't gone away.
He found a way from prison to send messages and tweets and a blog, and he was able to get his voice out, which is completely illegal. And he basically was, again, saying I was a bad mom, saying that all I cared about was raising money. I remember actually feeling really scared at the time because I didn't know if he'd escaped from prison. I thought, did he get out? Are my kids safe? Is he out and looking for the rest of my family?
And her fears are heightened when Lauren's daughter Chloe receives a series of Snapchat messages.
I don't know if it was Lewis. I don't know if it was a random person. He knew the exact location of the grave where Breck was buried. He knew too many details that I feel like wasn't on the news. And he said that Breck was very sexy before he died, and he sent him nudes and asked if I wanted to see them. And then he wanted to speak to my mom as well. He was like, is Lauren there? And it was horrific.
How devastating it must be for Breck's family. It's re-traumatizing, so they've already gone through his horrific murder and that loss. And then to be goaded from prison.
Police investigated, but he had set up a system whereby they couldn't trace it. And he didn't actually get in trouble for it, but hopefully it's in his records for when he tries to get probation. He's never shown remorse. He's never said he's sorry. He's always blamed me. So he's not fit for human consumption.
I like to remember Breck as being the older figure of the siblings, the protector of us three. In our childhood photos, it was always me and the triplets just all in a row, all the same height, and then just Breck was towering over us. I'm not a big fan of some of the ways that people have portrayed Breck online. Some will say that my brother was stupid or dumb. Why would he fall for that? What an idiot for going there and believing those lies when there's just such a simple explanation. He was groomed. It goes to show that even the smartest person can just be completely groomed into believing such ridiculous lies.
I have a theory that a lot of bad things that happen in the world are because of jealousy. And I definitely feel that Daines was jealous of Breck. He knew what he wanted to be. He wanted to be a pilot. He wanted to work in technology. He was focused. He was innately good and handsome and clever and funny. And, you know, I adored that kid.